30 seconds. That is how close Lauren Hayes was to saving a life. 30 seconds between a crash cart and a coding patient. 30 seconds before handcuffs clicked shut and a CEO watched from his office window with cold satisfaction. This is not a story about one bad hospital. This is about what happens when corporate power decides that silence is worth more than a human leg. When a nurse who dared to challenge budget cuts that were killing patients became a target. When police became weapons. When evidence was manufactured with the precision of a balance sheet. You are about to witness how an innocent woman spent 8 months as an accused felon, while a 72-year-old man lost his leg because she was arrested 4 minutes too soon. How a forgotten camera in a server backup became a smoking gun. How one CEO's arrogance built a conspiracy so brazen that even the FBI could not look away. If you have ever wondered whether speaking up at work is worth the risk, this story will show you the cost of silence and the price of truth. Drop a like if you are watching from somewhere that needs to hear this. Comment your location. Let people know this happened in Denver, but it could happen anywhere. Stay until the end. What comes next will change how you see every hospital you ever walk into. To understand how a CEO could order the arrest of a nurse during a medical emergency, you need to understand the ecosystem that made such a crime possible. This is not a story that begins with handcuffs. It begins 3 weeks earlier on a Tuesday night shift at Summit Ridge Medical Center, where Lauren Hayes is managing 12 ICU patients who should have 3 nurses instead of 1. The fluorescent lights hum at a frequency that burrows into your skull after the first 8 hours. Lauren has been here for 9. Her shift technically starts at 6 in the evening and ends at 6 in the morning. But the reality of ICU nursing is that you arrive early to get report from the day shift, and you stay late to ensure nothing falls through the cracks when you hand off to the next team. The hospital calls this dedication. Lauren calls it survival. When you are responsible for keeping people alive with machines and medications and constant vigilance, you do not punch a clock and walk away at exactly 6:01. She moves through the unit with the efficient grace of someone who has internalized 1,000 small workflows. Check the ventilator settings on the patient in bed 3. Adjust the IV pump rate on the patient in bed 7. Note the subtle change in urine output on the patient in bed 9 that probably means early kidney failure if nobody intervenes in the next 2 hours. Her hands work while her brain runs parallel calculations, medication, interactions, lab values, trending vitals, family dynamics, physician orders that need clarification, supplies that are running low. This is competence, not the kind that announces itself or requires recognition, the kind that prevents deaths in the margins, that catches the error before it reaches the patient, that notices the blood pressure dropping 15 minutes before the monitor alarm sounds. Lauren Hayes is not a hero. She is a professional doing work that requires her to be correct every single time, because incorrect means someone stops breathing, or their heart stops beating, or their brain stops getting oxygen. Tonight, she catches a medication error that would have killed an elderly woman in bed 4. The pharmacy sent up dopamine when the order was for dobutamine. Similar names, wildly different effects. One supports blood pressure. One can cause a hypertensive crisis in a patient already fragile from septic shock. Lauren sees the bag, checks it against the order, catches the discrepancy, calls. The pharmacy waits 20 minutes for the correct medication while manually supporting the patient's pressure with fluid boluses. The patient never knows how close she came. The family never knows. The hospital never acknowledges it. This is just Tuesday. Summit Ridge Medical Center does not look like a place where people die from budget cuts. The lobby is all soaring ceilings and abstract art installations that cost more than Lauren's annual salary. The executive floor has cappuccino machines and ergonomic furniture and windows that overlook the Denver skyline. The mission statement, etched into the marble wall near the main entrance, talks about excellence, compassion, innovation, community. The brochures in the waiting room show diverse families smiling at caring doctors in crisp white coats. The website features testimonials from grateful patients whose lives were saved by cutting-edge technology and dedicated staff. The ICU has 4 broken IV pumps that keep alarming for no reason, forcing nurses to waste time troubleshooting phantom errors. The supply room is stocked with the cheapest central line kits the hospital could negotiate. And these kits have a failure rate that everyone knows about, but nobody officially acknowledges. The staffing ratios violate best practice guidelines from every major nursing organization, but the guidelines are just recommendations, and recommendations do not have legal teeth. Damian Cross runs Summit Ridge, the way a venture capitalist runs a portfolio company. He does not hate patients. He does not wake up thinking about ways to harm people. He simply operates from a framework in which patient care is one variable among many, and not always the most important one. When he looks at the hospital's financials, he sees a system that can be optimized. Revenue per bed, cost per employee, supply chain efficiencies, payer mix, length of stay, readmission penalties. He has dashboards that track these metrics in real time. He has consultants who specialize in healthcare operational efficiency. He has a board of directors who hired him specifically to transform Summit Ridge from a struggling community hospital into a profitable regional healthcare system. His mental model is clean and rational. Healthcare is expensive because it is inefficient. Inefficiency is waste. Waste is money that could be returned to shareholders or reinvested in expansion or used to recruit better executives. Nurses complain about staffing ratios, but nurses always complain, and the data shows that patient outcomes are only marginally worse with leaner staffing, and marginal is acceptable when the alternative is budget overruns that threaten the entire system. Equipment fails sometimes, but all equipment fails eventually. And buying premium supplies when generic alternatives exist is just poor resource allocation. He is not a villain in his own story. He is a leader making tough decisions that other people lack the courage to make. He is protecting the hospital's financial health so that it can continue to serve the community. He is implementing best practices from the business world that healthcare has been slow to adopt because healthcare is tradition-bound and resistant to change. When nurses push back, or doctors complain, or patient advocates raise concerns, he listens politely and then explains the larger strategic picture they are missing. He is always patient. He is always reasonable. He is always certain that he is right. Lauren first registers on his radar during a board meeting on a Wednesday morning in late September. She is not supposed to be there. The meeting agenda includes a discussion of proposed budget cuts, and nursing leadership is invited to provide input. The ICU director, Margaret Chen, is scheduled to present the nursing perspective. But Margaret called in sick at the last minute, and her assistant director is on vacation, and the charge nurse who gets called to fill in decides that if anyone can speak to the reality of ICU operations, it is Lauren Hayes. So Lauren gets a phone call at 9 in the morning asking if she can be at the hospital by 10:30 to present at a board meeting. She is exhausted from working a night shift that ended 2 hours ago, but she says yes, because this is the kind of opportunity that does not come twice. She shows up in business casual clothes that she keeps in her car for exactly this kind of emergency. She has a folder full of documentation that she has been compiling for months, incident reports filed about equipment failures, near-miss events where patients almost died, from preventable errors, outcome data showing correlation between staffing levels and complication rates, copies of policy recommendations from the American Nurses Association and the American Association of Critical Care Nurses. She has done her homework because she always does her homework. The boardroom is on the 4th floor, all glass walls and polished wood and leather chairs. The board members are a mix of local business leaders, physicians with financial stakes in the hospital, and community representatives who provide demographic diversity without much actual power. Damian Cross sits at the head of the table in a charcoal suit that probably costs $3,000. He greets Lauren with a warm handshake and introduces her to the board as one of our dedicated ICU nurses who will be providing clinical perspective on the proposed operational adjustments. Operational adjustments is how he describes the plan to cut nursing staff by 15% and replace full-time employees with per diem workers who cost less and receive no benefits. Operational adjustments is how he describes switching to cheaper medical supplies from a vendor with documented quality control issues. Operational adjustments is how he describes increasing patient-to-nurse ratios from 1 to 12 to 1 to 15, which is functionally impossible to do safely but looks great on a spreadsheet. Lauren listens to his presentation first. Slides showing cost projections, graphs illustrating potential savings, benchmarking data comparing Summit Ridge to other hospitals in the region. He makes it sound reasonable. He makes it sound inevitable. He makes it sound like anyone who objects simply does not understand the financial realities of modern healthcare. Then it is her turn. She opens her folder and begins presenting data. Not anecdotes, not emotional appeals, numbers. In the last 6 months, the ICU has had 17 equipment-related incidents that delayed patient care. 12 of those incidents involved the low-cost IV pumps that malfunction. 4 involved central line kits that failed during insertion, requiring multiple attempts and increasing infection risk. In the same period, the unit has seen a 22% increase in hospital-acquired infections, which correlates directly with increased patient loads per nurse that leave less time for proper sterile technique and hygiene protocols. Patient falls have increased by 30%. Medication errors caught before reaching patients have increased by 18%. Which sounds good until you realize it means more errors are being made in the first place because nurses are stretched too thin to double-check their work properly. She presents cost data too. Each hospital-acquired infection costs an average of $40,000 to treat and opens the hospital to potential litigation. Each patient fall can result in injury requiring extended stay and additional treatment. Each medication error that reaches a patient creates liability exposure. The proposed staffing cuts will save approximately $1.2 million annually in labor costs. But if those cuts lead to even a modest increase in preventable complications, the hospital will spend far more than it saves, not to mention the reputational damage and potential loss of accreditation. The board members shift in their seats. A few take notes. One physician on the board nods slowly, clearly recognizing the clinical reality Lauren is describing. Damian Cross sits very still, his expression pleasant and attentive, but his eyes have gone flat in a way that anyone who has worked in corporate environments would recognize. This is a man who has just been contradicted in front of his board, using his own language of metrics and cost-benefit analysis, and he is not someone who tolerates contradiction well. When Lauren finishes, there is a moment of silence. Then one board member asks a clarifying question about infection rates. Another asks about the correlation between staffing and outcomes. A third asks whether other hospitals in the region have similar data. Lauren answers each question directly and provides sources for her numbers. She has anticipated these questions. She has backup documentation. She is not here to make speeches. She is here to present facts. Damian Cross waits until the questions stop. Then he smiles and thanks Lauren for her passion and her dedication to patient care. He acknowledges that these are complex issues that require careful consideration. He suggests that perhaps the board should table the vote on the proposed adjustments pending further review and additional data gathering. He makes it sound like he is being responsive and thoughtful. He makes it sound like Lauren has been heard. But after the meeting in the parking lot, he opens his phone and makes a note. Lauren Hayes, ICU nurse. Problem. This is not a man who yells or threatens. This is a man who solves problems through systems. He has spent his career learning how to identify obstacles and design elegant solutions that make those obstacles disappear. Lauren Hayes has just become an obstacle. and Damian Cross is already thinking about how to remove her in a way that looks like coincidence, like consequence, like anything except retaliation. The second pillar of this story is Frank Delaney himself. He is not a plot device. He is a 72-year-old man with a history that matters. He worked for the Postal Service for 38 years, delivering mail in the Denver suburbs through heat and snow and the grinding repetition of routes he could walk in his sleep. He married his high school sweetheart, Patricia, and they raised 2 daughters in a 3-bedroom house with a mortgage they paid off 5 years before retirement. Patricia died of ovarian cancer 6 years ago, and Frank still wears his wedding ring and talks to her picture every morning while he drinks coffee. He came to Summit Ridge for what was supposed to be a routine aortic valve replacement. 72 is not old anymore, not with modern surgical techniques, and his cardiologist assured him the procedure was straightforward. The surgery went fine. The recovery did not. He developed an infection at the surgical site. Then he developed pneumonia. Then he developed atrial fibrillation that required cardioversion. 3 weeks into what should have been a 5-day hospital stay, he is still in the ICU, tethered to machines dependent on people like Lauren to keep him alive. His daughter Megan sits beside his bed during evening visiting hours, holding his hand and trying not to cry where he can see. She is 46, divorced, works as a middle school teacher, and spends her weekends driving to the hospital because her sister lives in California and cannot get time off work. She brings her father crossword puzzles and plays audiobooks on her phone because he is too weak to hold a book, but he always loved reading. She asks the doctors questions and does not always understand the answers. She feels helpless and angry and terrified in the specific way that adult children feel when they watch their parents become fragile. Lauren brings Megan coffee from the break room and sits with her for a few minutes between tasks. She does not offer false reassurance. She does not say your father is going to be fine when the truth is more complicated. What she says is, I am watching him closely. I am going to fight like hell to get him through this. If something changes, I will tell you immediately. This is the kind of honesty that frightens people and also comforts them because at least it is real. Frank trusts Lauren in the way that critically ill patients trust the person who shows up every night shift and actually looks at them instead of just looking at monitors. She adjusts his pillows without being asked. She notices when he is in pain before he says anything. She talks to him like he is still a person and not just a malfunctioning biological system that needs troubleshooting. When he gets scared at 3 a.m. and cannot sleep, she pulls up a chair and asks him about his postal route, about his wife, about the garden he used to keep. She does this even though she has 11 other patients and a mountain of charting. She does this because it is part of the job that does not appear in any protocol manual, but matters more than most of the things that do. The third pillar is the quiet erosion of institutional integrity that happens when people who know better choose silence over risk. Dr. Priya Shah is a good intensivist trapped in a system that punishes goodness. She graduated, top of her class, from Stanford Medical School. She completed her residency and fellowship at Mass General. She could have worked anywhere, but she chose Summit Ridge because she wanted to practice in a community hospital where she could make a real difference. That was 8 years ago. Now she has $200,000 in student loans, 2 kids in private school, and a mortgage on a house she can barely afford. She is 41 years old and already tired in a way that vacation cannot fix. She knows the staffing is dangerous. She knows the equipment is failing. She knows the budget cuts are going to kill someone eventually. But she also knows that speaking up too loudly will make her a target. And targets do not last long in institutions that value compliance over courage. So she does what she can within the boundaries of acceptable dissent. She documents carefully. She advocates for her patients in ways that cannot be easily punished. She writes detailed notes that create a paper trail if something goes wrong. She picks small battles and wins them when possible. And she tells herself that this is pragmatic, that staying employed and keeping her license allows her to help more patients in the long run than getting fired for being a whistleblower would. When Lauren brings her concerns about the new central line kits, Priya listens and agrees, and then quietly suggests that Lauren should put it in writing and submit it through the proper channels. She knows the proper channels are designed to absorb complaints and ensure nothing changes, but at least it creates documentation. At least it shows that someone tried. This is what institutional capture looks like. Not people who do not care. People who care, but have been trained to channel that caring into processes that protect the institution instead of the patients. Kim Alvarez is the other night shift ICU nurse, 28 years old, 3 years out of nursing school, still convinced that the system works if you just follow the rules correctly. She likes Lauren, but thinks she takes unnecessary risks. She thinks filing incident reports and challenging administrators and speaking up at meetings is asking for trouble. Her mother was a nurse who lost her job for reporting a physician's mistakes, and Kim learned early that loyalty to the institution is how you survive. When Lauren files yet another equipment failure report, Kim pulls her aside and suggests maybe she should let it go, pick her battles, think about job security. Lauren does not argue. She just keeps filing reports because the alternative is watching preventable harm happen and saying nothing. The erosion happens gradually. Each small compromise. Each time someone sees something wrong and decides not to risk their career over it. Each meeting where concerns are raised and then quietly buried in committee reviews. Each incident that gets documented but never addressed. The system does not need villains. It just needs enough people who are too tired, or too scared, or too practical to fight back. And eventually, the system becomes a machine that runs on the assumption that silence is cheaper than accountability. The breaking point comes 2 weeks after the board meeting. Damian Cross presents a revised proposal that supposedly addresses nursing concerns while still achieving the necessary cost savings. The proposal includes language about enhanced training and improved workflows and technology solutions that will offset reduced staffing. It sounds reasonable on paper. It is designed to sound reasonable. The board votes to approve it with minor modifications. The nursing director is told to implement the changes over the next quarter. Lauren is not at this meeting. She is working a night shift. But a sympathetic board member, the physician who nodded during her presentation, sends her an email with the meeting minutes attached. The email includes a brief note. "I am sorry. I tried. There were not enough votes." Lauren reads the email in the break room at 2 in the morning. She reads the minutes. She reads the proposal. She understands exactly what is going to happen. Patients are going to die. Not immediately. Not in ways that can be easily traced back to staffing cuts. But the math is inevitable. Fewer nurses means more errors. More errors means more complications. More complications means more deaths. And the hospital will call these deaths unavoidable outcomes and learning opportunities and quality improvement challenges. They will never call them what they are: murders committed through spreadsheet optimization. She sits in the break room with her cold coffee and thinks about quitting, just walking away, finding a job at a different hospital, protecting herself. But she thinks about Frank Delaney in bed 9, and the elderly woman in bed 4, and all the patients who do not have names to her yet, but will if she keeps working here. She thinks about the fact that every hospital is running the same calculations, making the same cuts, justifying the same compromises. There is no safe place to run to. There is only the choice between speaking up or being complicit. So she makes a decision. She is going to keep documenting everything. She is going to keep filing reports. She is going to be so thorough and so persistent and so undeniably correct that eventually someone with power will have to listen. She does not know that Damian Cross is already designing the system that will destroy her. She does not know that her competence and her integrity have marked her as a threat. She does not know that in 2 weeks she will be in handcuffs while a patient codes 30 seconds away. She just knows that silence is not an option. And in a system designed to enforce silence, that knowledge makes her dangerous. Institutional power does not destroy people through dramatic confrontation. It destroys them through systems, through policies and procedures and digital access logs that can be rewritten by anyone with the right credentials, through vendors and consultants and intermediaries who provide plausible deniability, through the banal mechanics of corporate infrastructure weaponized against a single human being who made the mistake of being right at the wrong time. Damian Cross does not personally break laws. He creates conditions in which other people break laws on his behalf, insulated by layers of corporate structure and administrative privilege. He is a man who understands that power is not about force. It is about architecture. You build systems that produce the outcomes you want, and then you let the systems run. His first move after the board meeting is research. He does not storm into his office and plot revenge like a movie villain. He simply opens Lauren Hayes' personnel file and begins reading. Employment history, performance reviews, disciplinary actions, shift schedules, badge access logs, email correspondence, emergency contact information, credit report obtained through the hospital's background check vendor. He is looking for vulnerabilities, pressure points, patterns that can be exploited or manipulated. What he finds is frustrating. Lauren is competent. Her performance reviews are exemplary. She has no history of theft or dishonesty. Her disciplinary record contains exactly 2 write-ups, both for insubordination, both related to times when she challenged physician orders she believed were unsafe. The write-ups actually make her look good because in both cases, the physicians later acknowledged she was correct. Her financial situation shows student loan debt and credit card balances, but nothing extraordinary for someone in her income bracket. She is not desperate. She is not vulnerable in obvious ways. But everyone is vulnerable if you look hard enough. What Damian notices is that Lauren works extra shifts frequently. She has access to supply rooms and medication storage as part of her normal duties. She documents everything obsessively, which means there is a substantial paper trail that could be used to create patterns if you know how to arrange the pieces. And most importantly, she is trusted. When equipment goes missing, nobody suspects the nurses who work night shift and have legitimate reasons to access restricted areas. They suspect the people who seem out of place. The trick is to make Lauren seem out of place retroactively. Summit Ridge recently upgraded to a new inventory management system called MedTrack Pro. The system is designed to prevent theft by tracking every piece of equipment over $500 through RFID tags and badge access logs. When someone enters a supply room, they swipe their employee badge. The system records who entered when and for how long. When equipment is removed, it is supposed to be scanned and logged to a patient account. The system generates automatic alerts when items go missing or when access patterns seem unusual. The system also has administrative override capabilities. Senior leadership can make corrections for data entry errors. They can adjust timestamps if the system clock is wrong. They can add or remove badge swipes if someone forgot to scan in or if a badge reader malfunctioned. These overrides are logged, but the logs are only reviewed during audits, and audits happen quarterly at most. Damian Cross has full administrative access to MedTrack Pro. His login credentials allow him to edit any record in the system. He begins making small changes. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would trigger immediate alerts. He pulls up the access logs for the main ICU supply room and identifies nights when Lauren was working. Then he adds her badge ID to entry records from nights when she was not working. Just a few instances spread over 6 weeks. 2:04 a.m. on a Tuesday when she was actually home sleeping. 11:47 p.m. on a Friday when she was on vacation. 3:22 a.m. on a Sunday when she had called in sick. He creates a pattern that looks like after-hours theft. Someone entering the supply room when they should not be there. Someone who has legitimate access credentials but is using them at suspicious times. He does this from his home office late at night, routing his connection through the hospital VPN using credentials that show his access as routine administrative activity. He is careful about the digital breadcrumbs. Each edit is logged, but the logs show standard administrator corrections for system errors. The system does not differentiate between someone fixing a genuine glitch and someone manufacturing evidence. That is the beauty of having legitimate authority. Your crimes look like job duties. The next piece requires a human element. Damien cannot personally steal equipment without creating obvious exposure. He needs someone expendable. Someone who can be traced if necessary, but who cannot trace back to him. Someone with enough access to make the theft plausible, but not enough sophistication to understand they are being used. Caleb Price is 26 years old, works as an orderly in the surgical unit, and has $53,000 in student loan debt from a college degree he never finished. His personnel file shows he is punctual and competent, but unremarkable. He has no disciplinary history, no red flags, just another young person grinding through a hospital job while trying to figure out what to do with a life that has not gone according to plan. His background check revealed a sealed juvenile record, which means something happened when he was younger, but it has been legally erased. That sealed record is leverage if Caleb ever becomes a problem. The approach happens through an intermediary. Damien does not make the contact himself. He uses a consultant named Marcus Reeves, who does security assessments for healthcare facilities. Marcus is not part of the conspiracy in any meaningful sense. He genuinely believes he is conducting a penetration test of Summit Ridge's inventory systems. Damien hired him for exactly that purpose, and then gave him a specific vector to test whether an insider with legitimate access could circumvent the tracking systems. Marcus approaches Caleb in the employee cafeteria on a Wednesday afternoon. He introduces himself as a security consultant working on a hospital project. He explains that he needs someone with facility access to help test the new inventory system by removing some equipment and seeing how long it takes for the system to flag the missing items. It is framed as a sanctioned security audit, a legitimate, if slightly irregular project. The hospital wants to know if their theft prevention measures actually work, and the only way to know is to simulate a theft scenario with a real employee who has real access. Caleb is skeptical at first, but Marcus has a business card and a consulting contract with the hospital and a professional demeanor that makes the whole thing seem legitimate. Plus, Marcus mentions that participants in the security test will receive a $3,000 stipend for their time and discretion. $3,000 is 2 months of student loan payments. It is the difference between making rent and not making rent. It is enough money to make a questionable decision seem rational. Marcus provides detailed instructions. He gives Caleb a key that fits the ICU supply room lock. He explains that the key is a backup that exists for emergencies when the electronic badge system fails, and its use will help test whether the backup access points are being properly monitored. He tells Caleb exactly which items to take 4 pieces of equipment with RFID tags. Total value, approximately $8,000. He tells him when to take them Tuesday night around 2 a.m. when the ICU is typically understaffed and busy. He tells him to avoid cameras where possible, but not to worry too much because this is all officially sanctioned and nobody is going to get in trouble. He gives Caleb a phone number to call if anything goes wrong. He promises the $3,000 will be deposited within 24 hours of completing the task. He makes everything sound routine and safe and entirely above board. Caleb agrees because he needs the money and because humans are very good at convincing themselves that something questionable is actually fine if an authority figure tells them it is. The theft happens on a Tuesday night in early October. Caleb enters the hospital through a service entrance using his employee badge. He takes the stairs to the ICU level to avoid running into anyone in the elevators. His hands are sweating. His heart is pounding. He keeps telling himself this is a sanctioned security test, that he is helping the hospital improve its systems, that the consultant said everything was authorized. But his body knows something his brain is trying not to acknowledge. This feels wrong. He uses the key to enter the supply room at 2:04 a.m. The room is dimly lit and full of shelves stacked with equipment. He has a list of specific items to take: a portable ultrasound unit, 2 infusion pumps, a cardiac monitor, He finds them, removes them from their storage locations, and loads them onto a utility cart. The RFID tags do not alarm because the system is designed to track items leaving the hospital, not moving between rooms internally. He wheels the cart down a service corridor to a loading dock where he transfers everything into his personal vehicle. The entire operation takes 11 minutes. There is a camera in the hallway near the supply room, but it is positioned to watch the main entrance and does not capture the service corridor. Caleb knows this because Marcus told him which route to use. What Caleb does not know is that Marcus knows about the camera placement because Damian Cross provided that information. What Caleb does not know is that his face is visible in profile for approximately 4 seconds on a different camera, one that monitors the stairwell entrance. What Caleb does not know is that this footage will eventually destroy him. He delivers the equipment to a storage unit in Aurora, 30 minutes from the hospital. The unit number and access code were provided by Marcus. Caleb opens the unit, wheels the equipment inside, and drives home. The next morning, $3,000 appears in his checking account via mobile deposit. The payment comes from a business account registered to Apex Security Consulting LLC, which is a real company that does real security work and has no idea one of their vendor accounts has been used for this transaction. Caleb tells himself he completed a security audit and got paid for it. He does not ask too many questions because questions would require him to acknowledge what he probably already knows. He goes to work the next day and the day after that. Nobody says anything. Nobody seems to notice. He starts to relax. He starts to think maybe it really was legitimate after all. He has no idea that in 3 weeks he will be arrested by federal agents and offered a choice between prison and cooperation. The investigation begins 5 days later when the missing equipment finally gets flagged during a routine inventory audit. The hospital's supply chain manager notices discrepancies between physical counts and system records. She runs a report and identifies 4 items that are marked as present in the system but cannot be located physically. She flags this to hospital security, which is standard protocol for potential theft. Hospital security reviews the MedTrack Pro access logs and finds multiple entries for Lauren Hayes at unusual times. Badge swipes at 2 in the morning when she was not scheduled. Supply room access during periods when she should have been off the floor. The pattern looks like classic insider theft. Someone using legitimate credentials to access restricted areas when they think nobody is watching. Security pulls camera footage from the nights in question and finds nothing definitive, but the absence of footage from the service corridors is not unusual. The cameras have blind spots. Everyone knows that. The security director prepares a preliminary report and sends it to hospital administration with a recommendation to involve local law enforcement. The report lands on Damian Cross's desk. He reviews it with the careful attention of someone who already knows what it says because he wrote the script. He expresses grave concern. He notes that employee theft is a serious matter that damages trust and creates patient safety risks. He authorizes a full investigation and suggests with apparent reluctance that they may need to involve the police to ensure proper handling and to deter future incidents. The hospital's legal counsel drafts a formal complaint and submits it to the Denver Police Department. The complaint outlines the missing equipment, the suspicious access logs, and the financial irregularities. It does not mention that the access logs have been modified. It does not mention that the person who authorized the investigation is the same person who created the evidence. It is a clean, professional document that looks exactly like what it claims to be a request for police assistance with an internal theft investigation. Officer Blake Harmon and Officer Jorge Santos are assigned to the case. They are both Denver PD, both assigned to the precinct that covers Summit Ridge's jurisdiction, both competent professionals with clean service records. They are not corrupt in the way that movie cops are corrupt. They do not take bags of cash in parking garages or plant evidence on innocent people for fun. They are transactional. They understand that policing is a job embedded in networks of power and that career advancement requires building relationships with important people. The approach happens through informal channels. A hospital administrator reaches out to their supervisor and mentions that Summit Ridge is dealing with a significant theft issue and would appreciate prioritization of the investigation. The administrator mentions that the hospital is considering a substantial donation to the Police Benevolent Fund. The administrator mentions that there might be opportunities for off-duty security contracts if this case is handled professionally and efficiently. None of this is explicitly quid pro quo. It is just networking. It is just relationship building. It is just the way things work. Harmon and Santos receive the case file and review the evidence. Badge access logs showing Lauren Hayes entering the supply room at suspicious times. Missing equipment worth $8,000. Financial records showing she carries debt. Personnel files showing she has been disciplined for insubordination. A statement from hospital security describing her as sometimes difficult and resistant to authority. The evidence is circumstantial, but sufficient for probable cause. The prosecutor's office agrees to pursue charges. The arrest warrant is issued on a Thursday afternoon. Harmon and Santos are told by the assistant district attorney that this is a solid case and that the suspect might be a flight risk given recent job performance issues. They are advised to execute the warrant as soon as possible. What they are not told is why the timing matters. What they are not told is that someone very powerful wants this arrest to happen in a very specific way at a very specific time. Damian Cross has been monitoring Frank Delaney's condition through the hospital's patient tracking system. As CEO, he has access to real-time vital signs and lab results for every patient in the facility. This access is justified as necessary for operational oversight and quality monitoring. In practice, it means he can watch a patient deteriorating and know when a crisis is imminent. Frank has been in the ICU for 3 weeks. He has survived the initial post-surgical complications, but his body is fragile. His labs show elevated D-dimer levels, which suggests clotting abnormalities. His oxygen saturation has been slowly declining. The intensivist notes in his chart indicate concern about possible pulmonary embolism. The notes recommend close monitoring and consideration of additional imaging if his status worsens. This is medical language for he might crash at any moment. Damian watches the trends. He does not need a medical degree to understand that the numbers are moving in the wrong direction. He knows that Lauren Hayes has developed a close relationship with this patient and his family. He knows that if this patient codes, Lauren will respond immediately because that is what she does. He knows that the optimal moment for an arrest is not when someone is sitting quietly at a desk. It is when they are moving, when they are emotional, when they are likely to resist or argue, when their reaction can be framed as erratic or dangerous. He calls Officer Harmon on a Friday afternoon. He identifies himself as the CEO of Summit Ridge Medical Center. He explains that they have been working with the police department on a theft investigation involving one of their employees. He mentions that the suspect is currently on shift, and this might be an optimal time to execute the warrant. He does not explain why it is optimal. He does not need to. Harmon is experienced enough to understand that hospitals have rhythms and that timing matters. If the CEO is suggesting now is a good time, then now is probably a good time. Harmon and Santos arrive at Summit Ridge at 3:30 p.m. They park in the main lot and enter through the front entrance. They do not notify hospital security that they are there. This is unusual, but not unprecedented. Sometimes police prefer to maintain the element of surprise. They take the elevator to the ICU floor and position themselves near the nursing station. They wait. At 3:42 p.m., Frank Delaney's oxygen saturation drops to 86%. The monitor alarm sounds. The telemetry tech at the central station sees the vital signs crashing and initiates a code blue. The overhead system activates. Code blue, ICU room 914. The announcement echoes through the hospital corridors like a death sentence counting down. Lauren is at the medication room preparing an IV antibiotic when she hears the code. She knows immediately which patient. Room 914, Frank Delaney. She drops what she is doing and runs. The crash cart is stationed near the elevator. She grabs it and begins pushing it toward the room. The wheels scream against the polished floor. Her sneakers find traction. Her brain is already running through protocols. Intubation equipment, epinephrine, defibrillator pads. She has done this 100 times. Muscle memory takes over. 30 seconds to the room. Maybe less if she pushes hard. The elevator doors open. Harmon and Santos step out. They position themselves directly in her path. Lauren sees them and assumes they are lost or looking for someone. She tries to move around them. Harmon steps sideways and blocks her. "Ma'am, stop." Now, Lauren stops. Not because she is complying, because her brain cannot process why two police officers are standing between her and a coding patient. The code blue alarm is still sounding. She can hear it in the rhythm of her pulse. "I have a patient coding, move." Her voice is clipped, professional. The voice of someone who does not have time for whatever this is. She tries to push the crash cart around them. Santos puts his hand on the cart handle and holds it in place. "Lauren Hayes, you need to come with us." The words do not make sense. Nothing about this makes sense. She looks past them toward room 914. The door is still closed. Nobody has started compressions yet. Every second matters. Every second is permanent neurological damage or cardiac arrest or death. After. Whatever this is after. "I have a patient dying." Harmon pulls handcuffs from his belt. The metal catches the fluorescent light. Lauren's brain tries to process what is happening and fails. This cannot be real. This cannot be happening. Not now. Not while Frank is coding. Not while she is the only person who can get to him fast enough. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for theft of hospital property. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." The handcuffs close around her wrists with a sound like a door slamming shut. The crash cart sits abandoned 15 feet from room 914. The code blue alarm keeps sounding. Lauren tries to pull away, tries to explain, tries to make them understand that they can arrest her in 5 minutes, in 10 minutes, in an hour. Just let her reach the patient first. Let her do her job first. Let her save him first. They do not let her. They walk her toward the elevator. She is still in scrubs, still wearing her stethoscope, still close enough to hear the alarm. Other staff members stare. Some look confused. Some look away. Nobody intervenes. Nobody asks what is happening. The police have authority, and authority is not questioned. Kim Alvarez is pulled from another patient and runs toward room 914. She reaches the room at 3:47 p.m., 4 minutes after the code was called. 4 minutes is a lifetime in cardiac arrest. 4 minutes is the difference between recovery and permanent damage. She finds Frank unconscious, no pulse, no respirations. She begins chest compressions while calling for the respiratory therapist. Other staff members arrive. They intubate. They push medications. They shock his heart back into rhythm. His heart restarts at 3:54 p.m. 7 minutes of inadequate perfusion. 7 minutes of his brain and organs starving for oxygen. 7 minutes that might have been 3 if Lauren had reached him when she was supposed to. The monitor shows sinus rhythm. His blood pressure is barely adequate, and his right leg, which has been showing signs of poor circulation for days, has finally crossed the threshold from threatened to unsalvageable. Dr. Priya Shah makes the call 2 days later after the vascular surgeons review the imaging and lab work. The blood clot that caused the code has damaged the arterial supply beyond repair. The tissue is necrotic. Amputation below the knee is the only option to prevent sepsis and death. She tells this to Megan Delaney in a quiet consultation room with tissue boxes on the table and pamphlets about limb loss support groups. "We got his heart back, but we lost the leg." Megan sits very still. She asks the questions that people ask when their brains are trying to reject reality. Is there any other option? Are you sure? Can you wait and see if it improves? Dr. Shah answers each question with patient compassion and unchanging facts. The leg is dead. Waiting will only make things worse. This is the only choice. Megan asks one more question. Where was Lauren? She always takes care of my dad. Where was she when this happened? Dr. Shaw does not have a good answer. She knows Lauren was arrested. She knows the arrest happened during the code. She knows that 4 minutes might have made a difference. But she cannot say that out loud because hospital legal counsel has already warned the staff that discussing the arrest could create liability. So she says something vague about staffing and unavailability and the team doing everything they could. Megan goes home that night and searches Lauren Hayes on her phone. The mugshot comes up immediately. The news articles describe hospital nurse arrested for equipment theft. The comments sections are filled with strangers declaring that she always looked suspicious that nurses are underpaid. So of course they steal that the medical system is corrupt from top to bottom. Nobody mentions that she was arrested during a code blue. Nobody mentions that a patient lost his leg in the 4 minutes she spent in handcuffs. That part of the story has not been told yet. Lauren learns about the amputation from her public defender 3 days later. She is sitting in a holding cell at the county jail waiting for a bail hearing. Marcus Chen sits across from her with a folder full of paperwork and the exhausted expression of someone who handles too many cases with too little time. He mentions almost casually that there was a complication with a patient at the hospital, that the patient she was trying to reach when she was arrested ended up requiring an amputation. He says this like it is a minor detail, a footnote in the larger case. Lauren asks for the patient's name, even though she already knows. Marcus checks his notes. Frank Delaney, 72-year-old male. Below knee amputation performed on October 20th. Lauren stops hearing anything after that. The rest of the conversation happens somewhere far away. Marcus talks about bail and arraignment and plea negotiations. Lauren sits in a metal chair under fluorescent lights and thinks about Frank Delaney, joking with her 2 days before the code. Thinks about Megan holding her father's hand. Thinks about the crash cart sitting 15 feet from the room. Thinks about how 30 seconds would have been enough. How if they had waited 30 seconds, just 30 seconds, she could have reached him. Could have started compressions immediately. Could have prevented the prolonged hypoxia that killed the circulation in his leg. 4 minutes. That is what her arrest cost. 4 minutes that turned a survivable emergency into a permanent disability. 4 minutes that exist because Damian Cross designed a frame job and timed it for maximum impact. 4 minutes that will follow her for the rest of her life, regardless of whether she is ever convicted of anything. On the 4th floor of Summit Ridge Medical Center, behind the glass walls of the executive suite, Damian Cross sits at his desk and reviews the incident reports from the Code Blue. The documentation shows a delay in response time due to staffing constraints. It does not mention the arrest. It does not need to. The arrest is a separate incident involving a criminal matter outside the hospital's control. There is no official connection between Lauren's detention and Frank's outcome. The system has compartmentalized the events into separate categories that cannot touch each other on paper. Damian makes a note to review the staffing protocols and consider additional training for Code Blue procedures. He drafts an email to the board expressing concern about the recent incident and his commitment to patient safety. He schedules a meeting with risk management to discuss potential liability. He does all the things that a responsible CEO does when a bad outcome occurs. And when he closes his laptop and leaves for the day, he does not think about Lauren Hayes sitting in a jail cell or Frank Delaney waking up to discover he has one leg. He thinks about the budget approval and the quarterly earnings call and whether the new parking structure will be completed on schedule. The frame is complete. The arrest has happened. The damage is done. All that remains is to let the criminal justice system grind forward and destroy whatever is left of Lauren Hayes, while Damian Cross continues running a hospital that looks perfect on paper and kills people in the margins where nobody important is watching. The machinery of institutional power does not announce itself with dramatic flourish. It destroys through paperwork, through press releases and administrative hearings and the cascading consequences of a single arrest that metastasizes into the complete erasure of a life. Lauren Hayes spends 4 days in county jail before a bail bondsman agrees to take her case, and those 4 days are enough to ensure that even if she is eventually acquitted, she has already lost everything that matters. The criminal charges are filed within 24 hours of her arrest. Felony theft of medical equipment valued at over $5,000. Abuse of access privileges. Fraud. The charging documents are written in the bland language of legal procedure, but the implications are stark. If convicted, Lauren faces up to 6 years in prison. Her mugshot is taken in the basement of the county courthouse under fluorescent lights that make everyone look guilty. She is wearing the scrubs she was arrested in. Her hair is pulled back in the ponytail she wears for work. Her face shows exhaustion and confusion, and the specific kind of fear that comes from knowing you are innocent, but understanding that innocence is not a defense against systems designed to process people efficiently rather than justly. The mugshot circulates online within hours. Local news outlets run the story with headlines that presume guilt through careful phrasing. Hospital nurse arrested in equipment theft investigation. Former Summit Ridge employee faces felony charges. The articles include her name, her age, the nature of the charges. Some include quotes from hospital spokespeople expressing shock and disappointment. None mention that she was arrested while responding to a medical emergency. None mention Frank Delaney's amputation. Those details do not fit the narrative of a straightforward theft case, so they are omitted not through conspiracy, but through the standard journalistic practice of focusing on what law enforcement says happened. Social media amplifies the story in ways that traditional media cannot. Her mugshot appears on Facebook and Twitter and Reddit threads about healthcare corruption. The comments sections fill with strangers who have never met her offering judgments with absolute certainty. She looks like someone who would steal. Nurses are underpaid, so of course they supplement their income. The whole medical system is corrupt, and this is just one more example. Some comments are sympathetic in ways that are almost worse. She must have been desperate. Student loans, probably. We do not pay healthcare workers enough, and then we are surprised when they turn to crime. Nobody knows the truth because the truth has not been told yet. And in the absence of truth, people construct narratives that confirm what they already believe about nurses and hospitals and the moral character of people who get arrested. The story becomes a mirror reflecting the viewer's existing assumptions. Lauren Hayes. The person disappears beneath Lauren Hayes, the symbol of whatever the observer wants her to represent. She posts bail on the 4th day. $50,000, which she does not have, so she pays a bondsman 10% and signs paperwork promising to appear for all court dates. She walks out of the detention center into October sunlight that feels like an accusation. Her car is still in the hospital parking lot where she left it 4 days ago. She takes an Uber to retrieve it and finds a parking ticket on the windshield. She drives home and discovers that her apartment complex has posted a notice on her door about lease violations related to criminal activity. The notice explains that tenants who are arrested on felony charges may be subject to immediate eviction pending review. She sits on her couch and stares at the wall for 3 hours. She has not eaten a real meal in 4 days. She has not slept more than 90 minutes at a stretch. Her phone has 217 unread messages from numbers she does not recognize. Most are from journalists requesting interviews. Some are from former co-workers expressing shock. A few are from people she went to nursing school with asking if the news is true. She does not respond to any of them. She does not know what to say. The truth sounds like a conspiracy theory. A CEO framed me for theft to silence my criticism of budget cuts. The arrest was timed to prevent me from saving a patient who then lost his leg because I was in handcuffs. It sounds insane even to her, and she lived through it. The termination paperwork arrives via email the next morning. Summit Ridge Medical Center regrets to inform her that her employment has been terminated effective immediately for violation of hospital policy theft, of hospital property and conduct unbecoming of a healthcare professional. The email is signed by the Director of Human Resources and includes instructions for returning her employee badge and any hospital property in her possession. There is no severance. There is no appeal process. There is just the clinical language of institutional abandonment delivered through an automated system that does not require anyone to speak to her directly. She receives a second email an hour later with COBRA insurance information. She can maintain her health insurance by paying the full premium cost, which is $1,143 per month. Her rent is $1,300. Her car payment is $375. Her student loans are $600. Her credit card minimums are $200. She has approximately $4,000 in savings, which means she can afford to exist for maybe 6 weeks before the math stops working. The nursing board notification arrives 3 days later. The Colorado Board of Nursing has been made aware of criminal charges filed against her license. Her license is suspended immediately pending investigation. She may not work as a registered nurse in any capacity in the state of Colorado until the investigation is complete and a determination is made regarding her fitness to practice. The suspension is administrative, not punitive, but the distinction is meaningless. She cannot work. She cannot pay her bills. She cannot function in the profession she spent years training for and a decade building. She meets with her public defender in a courthouse conference room that smells like instant coffee and defeat. Marcus Chen is 38 years old and handles approximately 80 active cases at any given time. He has 15 minutes scheduled for their initial consultation. He uses 10 of those minutes reviewing her file and the remaining 5 explaining the reality of her situation with the blunt efficiency of someone who has this conversation multiple times per day. The evidence against her is circumstantial but substantial. Badge access logs showing her entering the supply room at times when she was not scheduled. Missing equipment. Financial records suggesting money problems. Personnel files showing disciplinary history. The prosecution has a narrative that makes sense to juries. Nurse with debt problems steals equipment to resell. It happens. Not often, but often enough that it is believable. Marcus explains that the district attorney's office is willing to offer a plea deal. Plead guilty to a reduced charge of misdemeanor theft. Serve 1 year probation. Pay restitution for the missing equipment. No jail time. In exchange, she avoids a trial and the risk of conviction on felony charges that would mean prison. He explains this like it is a good deal, which from his perspective, it probably is. He handles 80 cases. He cannot take all of them to trial. The system runs on plea agreements. 97% of criminal cases are resolved through guilty pleas. This is how justice works in practice. Not through trials and evidence and truth, but through negotiation and risk management and defendants choosing the least bad option. Lauren tells him she did not steal anything. She tells him she is being framed. She tells him about the board meeting and Damian Cross and the arrest during the Code Blue. Marcus listens with the patient expression of someone who has heard every variation of "I am innocent" and has learned that believing your client is not the same as being able to prove it. He asks if she has any evidence of a frame job, any documentation, any witnesses, anything that shows someone else had access and motive. She does not. She has suspicions and timeline coincidences and a gut feeling that she was targeted. But suspicions are not evidence. Timeline coincidences are not proof. And her belief in her own innocence while genuine is not a legal defense. Marcus explains that proving a conspiracy theory about a hospital CEO is exponentially harder than defending against a straightforward theft charge. Juries are skeptical of elaborate explanations when a simple one is available. If she goes to trial and loses, she faces 6 years. If she takes the plea, she faces 1 year probation. He recommends the plea. She tells him she needs time to think about it. He gives her 2 weeks. After that, the offer expires and they proceed to preliminary hearing. He gathers his files and moves to his next client. She sits in the conference room for another 5 minutes after he leaves, staring at the fake wood grain of the table, trying to understand how her life collapsed this completely in less than 2 weeks. The isolation sets in gradually, and then all at once. Dr. Priya Shah sends a text message 3 days after the arrest. "I am sorry. I cannot help." The text disappears after 24 hours because Priya has enabled the auto-delete feature. The message is brief enough to be legally defensible and vague enough to avoid commitment. It says everything and nothing. Priya is sorry, but not sorry enough to risk her own position by defending someone the hospital has labeled a criminal. Kim Alvarez starts writing a character reference letter and gets as far as the second paragraph before her nurse manager pulls her aside for a conversation about professional boundaries and liability exposure. The manager does not explicitly forbid Kim from supporting Lauren. She simply explains that associating with someone under criminal investigation could impact Kim's own license and employment status. She suggests that Kim might want to think carefully about what kind of attention she wants to attract. Kim thinks carefully. She deletes the letter. She does not contact Lauren again. The former colleagues who do reach out do so carefully and briefly. A text saying, "Thinking of you." An email saying, "Let me know if you need anything," though both parties understand that nothing will actually be offered or requested. These messages are gestures toward compassion that stop short of action. They allow the sender to feel like they tried, while avoiding any actual risk. Lauren understands this. She does not blame them. She knows exactly how the system trains people to protect themselves first and principles second. She did the same thing for years, documented carefully, advocated within acceptable boundaries, picked battles she could win. The only difference is that she eventually picked one battle too many, and it picked her back. Megan Delaney tries to visit her 1 week after the arrest. She shows up at Lauren's apartment unannounced because Lauren has not been answering calls or messages. She knocks on the door and waits. Lauren is inside. She hears the knocking. She looks through the peephole and sees Megan standing in the hallway holding a casserole dish, because people bring food when they do not know what else to do with their need to help. Lauren does not open the door. She stands frozen on the other side, watching Megan knock 3 more times and then finally give up and leave the casserole on the doormat. She waits until she hears Megan's footsteps fade down the hallway before she opens the door and retrieves the dish. It is still warm. There is a note taped to the foil cover. "My dad is doing okay. The surgery went well. He asks about you. Please call when you can." Lauren throws the note away without reading it more than once. She puts the casserole in the refrigerator and does not eat it. She cannot face Megan because facing Megan means confronting what her arrest cost. 4 minutes. 1 leg. A 72-year-old man who trusted her learning to walk with a prosthetic because she was in handcuffs instead of doing chest compressions. The guilt is not rational. She knows intellectually that she was prevented from reaching him. She knows she did nothing wrong. But guilt does not care about logic. Guilt only cares that she was there, and he needed her, and she failed him regardless of the reason. Her landlord delivers the eviction notice in person 2 weeks after the arrest. He is apologetic, but firm. The building has a policy about tenants with pending criminal charges. It is in the lease agreement. Section 7, subsection C. Criminal activity or pending criminal charges that could impact the safety or reputation of the property. She has 30 days to vacate. He suggests she consult a lawyer if she has questions, but his tone makes clear that lawyers will not change the outcome. This is not negotiable. The building wants her gone. She looks for a new apartment and discovers that nobody will rent to someone with an open felony case. She applies to 8 different complexes and gets 8 rejections. Most do not bother explaining. A few cite background check issues. One leasing agent is honest enough to say, "Look, I would rent to you, but corporate has strict policies and I cannot override them. I am sorry." Everyone is sorry. Sorry is the most common word she hears. Sorry changes nothing. She moves into an extended stay motel near the airport. The kind of place that rents by the week and does not ask too many questions as long as the payment clears. Her room smells like cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner. The carpet has stains that predate her tenancy by years. The walls are thin enough that she can hear conversations and television and arguments from neighboring rooms. The parking lot has security cameras that do not work and lighting that flickers. This is where people land when the system finishes with them. This is the geography of failure. She applies for jobs. Not nursing jobs because her license is suspended, but any job that might pay enough to cover the motel and food and the minimum payments that keep her credit cards from defaulting. She applies to retail stores and restaurants and warehouses. She fills out applications honestly disclosing the pending criminal charges because lying would be worse if they find out later. Most applications disappear into automated systems and generate no response. A few result in phone screens that end abruptly when she explains her situation. One manager is direct enough to say, "We cannot hire someone with pending felony charges." Liability issues. I am sure you understand. She understands perfectly. She understands that a mugshot and criminal charges are social death regardless of guilt. She understands that institutions protect themselves by excluding anyone who represents risk. She understands that innocence is a luxury you can only afford if you have resources to prove it. And resources are exactly what the system strips away first. A grocery store finally hires her to stock shelves on the overnight shift. $10.75 per hour. No benefits. The shift starts at 11 p.m. and ends at 7 a.m. She works alone, mostly unloading pallets and organizing inventory in aisles that are empty of customers, but full of fluorescent light and the mechanical hum of refrigeration units. It is mind-numbing work that requires no skill and offers no satisfaction. It is a job that exists because her alternatives are homelessness or accepting a guilty plea for a crime she did not commit. Customers recognize her sometimes during the overlap hours when the store opens before her shift ends. They stare. They whisper. One woman takes a photo and posts it online with a caption. Nurse who stole from hospital now works at King Soopers on Colfax. The post gets shared 47 times. The comments are predictably vicious. How the mighty have fallen. At least she is working instead of living off taxpayers. She should be in jail. Lauren sees the post because someone sends it to her with no message, just the screenshot, and she stares at it for a long time, trying to understand what kind of person takes a photo of a stranger and posts it online for entertainment. She stops eating regular meals because groceries are expensive, and she is too tired to cook, and takeout is a luxury she cannot justify. She loses 16 pounds in 6 weeks. Her scrubs from the hospital no longer fit, not that she needs them anymore. She buys clothes from Goodwill, jeans that are slightly too large, t-shirts that are worn thin, a jacket for when the weather turns cold. Everything is functional and nothing fits quite right, and she does not care, because caring about appearance requires energy she does not have. Sleep becomes impossible. She lies in the motel bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the highway traffic, and trying not to think about Frank Delaney or Damian Cross, or the fact that her entire life has been reduced to this room and this job, and the slow countdown toward a trial that will determine whether she goes to prison for crimes she did not commit. When she does sleep, she has nightmares. The code blue alarm sounding, running toward a door that gets farther away the harder she runs. Handcuffs that tighten until her hands go numb. Damian Cross standing at a window, watching her drown. She stops showering daily because the motel shower is filthy and the water pressure is weak, and standing under lukewarm water while staring at mildewed grout feels like a metaphor for everything else. She stops checking her email because it is all bills and court notifications and automated messages from systems that do not care whether she responds. She stops answering her phone because everyone who calls wants something she cannot give. Her public defender wanting decisions about the plea deal. Her student loan servicer wanting payments she cannot make. Collection agencies representing the hospital wanting the money she supposedly owes for equipment she supposedly stole. The preliminary hearing happens 3 months after the arrest. She sits in a courtroom that smells like floor wax and recycled air while a prosecutor presents evidence in the flat, mechanical tone of someone reading a grocery list. Badge access logs entered into evidence. Inventory records entered into evidence. Financial documents entered into evidence. Each piece is damning in its clerical precision. The prosecutor does not need to argue or persuade. The evidence speaks for itself. A pattern of suspicious access, missing equipment, motive and opportunity. The preliminary hearing is not about guilt. It is about probable cause. The question is not, did she do it, but is there enough evidence to proceed to trial? The answer is obviously yes. Her attorney makes perfunctory objections that are overruled with perfunctory judicial responses. The judge finds probable cause and schedules a trial date 8 months out. Lauren walks out of the courthouse and vomits in a trash can on the sidewalk. A man in a suit walking past gives her a look of disgust and wide berth. She is a woman throwing up in public in clothes that have not been washed in a week. She is exactly the kind of person that respectable citizens cross the street to avoid. She has become invisible, except when she is being judged. Summit Ridge Medical Center thrives. Damian Cross gives an interview to a healthcare industry magazine about operational excellence and the challenges of balancing fiscal responsibility with quality care. The article includes a photo of him in his office with the Denver skyline behind him. He talks about tough decisions and necessary reforms and the importance of accountability at all levels of the organization. He does not mention Lauren Hayes. Why would he? Her case is a minor personnel matter that has been handled appropriately. The hospital has moved on. The budget cuts are implemented over the course of 3 months. Nursing staff is reduced by 12%. Full-time positions are converted to per diem. Supply contracts are renegotiated with cheaper vendors. Patient satisfaction scores drop slightly. Nursing turnover increases. But revenue increases more, and revenue is what matters to the board and the shareholders and the consulting firms that grade hospitals on efficiency metrics. The hospital receives an award for operational improvement from a healthcare management association. Damian Cross accepts the award at a conference in Phoenix and delivers a keynote speech about the future of lean healthcare delivery. Nobody connects Lauren's arrest to the budget debate because the arrest looks like a separate incident involving a bad employee who got caught stealing. The framing is perfect. The narrative is airtight. And the fact that a competent nurse who challenged the CEO on patient safety ended up criminally prosecuted for theft that she did not commit is just coincidence. The kind of coincidence that happens all the time in systems where power protects itself. But systems have vulnerabilities and powerful men make mistakes, and Damian Cross made one critical error in his elegant conspiracy. He assumed that destroying Lauren Hayes would be sufficient. He assumed that once she was arrested and charged and professionally ruined, the story would end because who would believe her and who would care enough to investigate? He did not account for the possibility that someone with technical skills and ethical backbone and enough stubbornness to ignore institutional pressure might decide to look for the truth. He did not account for Tessa Monroe. Tessa is Lauren's college roommate from 12 years ago when they were both undergraduates at the University of Colorado. Lauren went into nursing. Tessa went into computer science and ended up working in digital forensics for a private investigation firm that handles corporate security and litigation support. They kept in touch sporadically after graduation. A text on birthdays. Coffee twice a year. The kind of friendship that persists through inertia and genuine affection even when life pulls people in different directions. Tessa hears about the arrest through a mutual friend who sends her a link to the news article with a message. Did you see this about Lauren? Tessa reads the article and immediately knows something is wrong. Not because she has evidence, because she knows Lauren. They lived together for 2 years. She watched Lauren stay up until 3 a.m. studying for pharmacology exams. She watched her work double shifts at a hospital during summer breaks. She watched her cry when patients died and refused to quit even when the work nearly broke her. The woman she knew is not someone who steals equipment. The woman she knew is pathologically honest to the point of self-sabotage. Tessa reaches out. A text message. I saw the news. What the fuck happened? Are you okay? Do you need help? Lauren does not respond for 3 days. When she finally does, the message is brief. I did not do it. I cannot talk about it. My lawyer says not to. I am sorry. Tessa tries calling. Lauren does not answer. She tries showing up at Lauren's apartment and discovers she no longer lives there. She tries the hospital and is told Lauren is no longer employed there. She finally tracks her down at the extended stay motel by calling every cheap motel near the airport until she finds one where a clerk recognizes the name. She drives there and knocks on the door and waits. Lauren opens the door and Tessa barely recognizes her. She has lost weight. Her eyes are hollow. She is wearing sweatpants and an oversized shirt, and her hair is unwashed. She looks like someone who has stopped fighting. Tessa does not ask permission. She walks into the room and sits on the bed and says, "Tell me everything," Lauren tells her. Not everything, not the full story, but enough. The board meeting, the budget cuts, the way Damian Cross looked at her after she presented data, the arrest during the code blue, Frank Delaney's amputation, the badge access logs that show her entering the supply room when she was not even at the hospital. She tells it in a flat monotone like she is reading someone else's story, like none of it is real, like she has already accepted that this is just how her life is now. Tessa listens without interrupting. When Lauren finishes, Tessa asks one question. Do you have any proof that you did not steal the equipment? Lauren laughs. It is not a happy sound. You cannot prove a negative. I cannot prove I did not do something. That is not how it works. Tessa thinks about this. Then she says someone did steal it. If it was not you, it was someone else, which means there is evidence somewhere. Badge logs, camera footage, digital records, something. And if it exists, I can find it. Lauren shakes her head. My lawyer already tried. The hospital is not cooperating. They are saying it is an ongoing criminal investigation and they cannot release internal records without a subpoena. And even with a subpoena, they are going to fight it. Tessa pulls out her laptop. Then I do not ask permission. Lauren tells her not to. Tells her it is not worth it. Tells her that getting involved will just drag Tessa down with her and nothing will change anyway. But Tessa is already researching, already pulling up Summit Ridge's website and corporate structure and public vendor contracts, already thinking about vectors and access points and the specific kind of digital archaeology that her job has trained her to do. She does not tell Lauren that she is going to prove her innocence. She does not make promises she cannot keep. What she says is, I am going to look. And if there is something to find, I will find it. And if I find it, we will decide what to do with it. She leaves an hour later with a notebook full of names and dates and questions. Lauren watches her drive away and feels something she has not felt in months. Not hope, exactly. Hope is too strong a word. But maybe the absence of total despair. Maybe the possibility that someone believes her and cares enough to try. Tessa sits in her car in the motel parking lot and opens her laptop. She begins with the basics. Summit Ridge Medical Center's corporate structure, leadership, board of directors, vendor contracts, security systems. She pulls public records, business registrations, LinkedIn profiles. She builds a map of relationships and responsibilities. She looks for pressure points and vulnerabilities. She thinks about the problem the way she thinks about all digital forensics problems. Someone did something. That something left traces. Traces exist in systems. Systems can be examined. She knows this is going to take time. She knows she might find nothing. She knows that even if she finds evidence, getting it admitted in court is a different problem entirely. But she also knows that her friend is living in a motel working overnight shifts at a grocery store facing prison for a crime she did not commit, while the person who actually framed her is giving keynote speeches about operational excellence. And Tessa has skills that most people do not have, and access to tools that most people cannot use, and a level of stubbornness that her ex-girlfriend once described as clinically pathological. She drives home and begins building a timeline, not of what the prosecution says happened, of what must have happened if Lauren is telling the truth. Someone stole equipment. Someone modified access logs to frame Lauren. Someone coordinated an arrest timed for maximum damage. These are not random acts. These are planned events that required knowledge and access and motivation, which means somewhere in the digital infrastructure of Summit Ridge Medical Center, there is evidence of who actually did what and when and why. Finding it is just a matter of knowing where to look. And Tessa Monroe is very good at knowing where to look. Digital forensics is not magic. It is patient archaeology. It is understanding that every system leaves traces and every human action creates data exhaust that persists longer than people think. Tessa Monroe sits in her apartment with 3 monitors and a legal pad and begins the methodical work of dismantling a frame job that was designed by someone who thought he was smarter than the systems he controlled. She starts with what she knows. Lauren was arrested on October 19th at approximately 3:45 p.m. The alleged thefts occurred over a 6-week period prior to that date, according to the charging documents. The badge access logs show Lauren entering the ICU supply room at suspicious times on multiple occasions. The equipment that went missing was valued at approximately $8,000 and included specific items that would have been tracked through the hospital's inventory management system. What Tessa needs is not proof that Lauren is innocent. What she needs is proof of what actually happened. Who really stole the equipment? Who modified the access logs? Who coordinated the arrest? These are answerable questions if you know where to look and if you are willing to spend weeks staring at spreadsheets and metadata and the boring infrastructure of institutional record-keeping that most people never think about. Her first step is mapping Summit Ridge's digital ecosystem. She pulls public records for the hospital's vendor contracts through Colorado's open records laws. Healthcare facilities that accept Medicare and Medicaid funding have to disclose certain operational details. She finds contracts for the electronic health record system, the inventory management platform, the building security systems, the network infrastructure. Each contract includes vendor names and often includes technical specifications. The inventory system is called MedTrack Pro, manufactured by a company called HealthGuard Systems based in Atlanta. Tessa researches the product and finds white papers and user manuals and technical documentation that HealthGuard publishes for potential customers. She learns that MedTrack Pro uses RFID tags and badge access integration and generates audit logs that track every interaction with the system. She learns that the system has administrative override capabilities for senior leadership. She learns that these overrides are logged, but the logs are stored separately from the main database and are only reviewed during formal audits. This is the vulnerability. Administrative overrides create a parallel record of activity that most people do not know exists. If Damian Cross modified access logs to frame Lauren, those modifications would appear in the override logs, even if they were deleted from the primary system. The question is how to access those logs legally without compromising their admissibility as evidence. Tessa cannot hack into the hospital's systems. That would be illegal and would taint any evidence she found. What she needs is a legal mechanism for discovery, a lawsuit, a subpoena, something that compels the hospital to produce records they do not want to produce. But Lauren does not have the resources for a civil lawsuit, and her criminal defense attorney is overwhelmed and focused on the immediate problem of keeping her out of prison. Tessa researches employment law firms in Colorado and finds a small practice in Boulder that specializes in whistleblower cases and wrongful termination. The founding partner is a woman named Andrea Solis, who has a reputation for taking on institutional defendants and making them regret it through aggressive discovery and public pressure. Tessa cold calls the firm and asks for 15 minutes with anyone who will listen. She gets 20 minutes with a junior associate named David Kim, who is skeptical but curious. She brings a presentation, timeline of events, discrepancies in the official narrative, evidence of procedural irregularities. A hypothesis that Lauren Hayes was criminally prosecuted as retaliation for patient safety advocacy. David listens and asks good questions. How do you know the access logs were modified? What evidence do you have of CEO involvement? Why would a hospital risk criminal conspiracy to silence one nurse? Tessa answers each question honestly. She does not have definitive proof yet. What she has is a pattern that does not make sense unless someone was deliberately creating false evidence. And she has a friend who is being destroyed by that false evidence. David says he will discuss it with Andrea Solis. 3 days later, Tessa gets a call back. Andrea wants to meet with Lauren directly. They schedule a meeting at Andrea's office. Lauren shows up looking hollow and exhausted. She sits in a conference room with glass walls and modern furniture that feels like a different planet from the motel where she is living. Andrea asks her one question. Did you steal that equipment? No. Andrea asks a follow-up. Do you know who did? I think I was set up. I cannot prove it. But everything that happened was too coordinated, too perfectly timed. Someone wanted me arrested during that code blue specifically. Someone wanted to make sure I could not reach Frank Delaney. Someone had access to systems I did not have access to. But I do not have proof. Andrea makes notes, then she asks about the board meeting, about the budget cuts, about Damian Cross's reaction to being challenged. Lauren tells the story, and Andrea's expression does not change, but Tessa sees her pen moving faster. When Lauren finishes, Andrea closes her notebook and says, I am going to file a wrongful termination lawsuit. The lawsuit is not about getting you money. It is about getting access to records. Discovery in a civil case is broad. I can subpoena personnel files, email correspondence, board meeting minutes, system access logs. They will fight every request. But eventually, they will have to produce something. And if they modified records, I will find it. Lauren asks what this will cost. Andrea says she works on contingency for wrongful termination cases. If they win a settlement, the firm takes a percentage. If they lose, Lauren owes nothing. The risk is that going public with a lawsuit will make her an even bigger target. The hospital will argue that she is a disgruntled former employee trying to deflect from her own criminal behavior. The media will cover it, as he said, she said. It will get ugly. Lauren thinks about this for maybe 10 seconds. Then she says, do it. The lawsuit is filed 2 weeks later. Summit Ridge Medical Center's legal team responds with a motion to dismiss, arguing that the criminal case should be resolved before any civil proceedings. Andrea opposes the motion, with a brief arguing that employment law claims are independent of criminal charges and the hospital cannot use pending prosecution as a shield against civil liability. The judge denies the motion to dismiss and orders the parties to proceed with discovery. This is a small victory, but an important one. It means Andrea can start issuing subpoenas. She begins with personnel records and email correspondence. The hospital produces some documents, but claims that others are protected by attorney-client privilege or contain confidential patient information. Andrea files motions to compel. The hospital fights. This dance continues for weeks. Every document request becomes a negotiation. Every subpoena gets met with objections. The hospital is not trying to win. They are trying to delay and exhaust and hope that Lauren runs out of resources before they run out of stalling tactics. But Andrea is patient and Tessa is relentless. While the legal battle grinds forward, Tessa pursues a parallel investigation. She begins contacting former Summit Ridge employees through LinkedIn. She is careful about her approach, does not mention Lauren directly, just says she is researching hospital staffing practices and workplace culture. Some people ignore her messages, others decline politely, but a few respond and agree to confidential conversations. She talks to a security guard who quit 3 months after Lauren's arrest. He tells her there was confusion internally about the equipment theft case. The access logs did not match what the cameras showed. When he brought this to his supervisor, he was told to stop asking questions and just write up what administration wanted in the report. He felt uncomfortable enough about it that he started looking for another job. He left Summit Ridge and now works security for a tech company. He will not go on record. But he tells Tessa that the camera footage discrepancies were real and were deliberately ignored. This is important. It confirms that the access logs and the camera footage told different stories, which means the camera footage might still show the truth. The question is whether that footage still exists. Tessa researches Summit Ridge's security camera system. She finds the vendor contract through public records. The system was installed by a company called Secure View Systems, a national firm that provides cloud-based video surveillance for commercial clients. She calls Secure View's sales line, pretending to be a potential customer, and asks detailed questions about data retention policies. The sales representative explains enthusiastically that Secure View offers multiple retention tiers. Standard is 30 days. Premium is 90 days. Enterprise is 6 months with optional archival storage for compliance purposes. Summit Ridge is a hospital, which means they likely have enterprise-level service for regulatory compliance, which means footage from 6 months ago might still exist in the vendor's backup systems, even if the hospital's local copies have been deleted. But accessing that footage requires a subpoena directed at Secure View Systems, not Summit Ridge. Andrea discovers this possibility during her review of vendor contracts that the hospital was forced to produce. She immediately files a subpoena to Secure View Systems, requesting all video footage from Summit Ridge Medical Center for the relevant date, ranges. Secure View, having no particular loyalty to Summit Ridge and wanting to avoid liability for obstruction, complies with the subpoena. They produce approximately 400 hours of video footage in encrypted files with complete metadata, including timestamps, camera identifiers, and access logs, showing who viewed what footage and when. Tessa and Andrea spend 3 days reviewing footage. They start with October 17th at 2 a.m., the night when the hospital's access logs claim Lauren entered the supply room. They find camera 12, which monitors the ICU supply room entrance. At 2:04 a.m., a figure enters the supply room, but the figure is not Lauren Hayes. It is a man wearing scrubs and a surgical cap. He is using a physical key, not a badge. The angle is not perfect, but his face is visible in profile for approximately 3 seconds when he turns to check if anyone is watching. Tessa pauses the video and enhances the image. The man is young, maybe late 20s. She cross-references with personnel photos from Lauren's wrongful termination discovery documents. The match is not definitive from the still image alone, but the build and profile are consistent with an orderly named Caleb Price. Tessa makes note of this and continues watching. The man removes equipment from the supply room and loads it onto a cart. He exits through a service corridor. The whole operation takes 11 minutes. There is no Lauren Hayes. There is no badge swipe. There is just a man with a key stealing equipment while the hospital's systems are recording a completely different story in the access logs. Tessa and Andrea look at each other across the conference table. Andrea says, "We need to verify this is Caleb Price." Tessa says, "I can do that." She pulls up Caleb's social media profiles and finds photos. The facial structure matches. The build matches. Andrea makes copies of the footage and has her firm's video analyst do a formal comparison. The analyst confirms with reasonable certainty that the person in the supply room footage is consistent with Caleb Price's identifying characteristics. Now they have proof that someone other than Lauren stole the equipment. But they need more. They need proof of the conspiracy. Proof that Damian Cross was involved. Proof that the arrest was coordinated. Tessa goes back to the footage and searches for other cameras, other angles, other moments that might have been captured. She finds camera 47, which monitors a 4th-floor hallway outside the executive offices. On October 19th at 3:47 p.m., the exact time of Lauren's arrest, the camera shows a figure standing at a window. The window overlooks the 1st-floor main entrance area. Tessa enhances the image. The figure is Damian Cross. He is standing with his hands in his pockets, looking down at something below the camera's field of view. The timestamp is precise. 3:47 p.m. the exact minute Lauren was being handcuffed. Tessa pulls the access logs from the hospital's calendar system that was produced in Discovery. Damian Cross's calendar for October 19th shows no scheduled meetings between 3:30 and 4:30 p.m. He had no business reason to be on the fourth floor at that time. He was there to watch. He was there because he knew the arrest was happening and he wanted to see it. But the most damning piece comes from phone records. Andrea subpoenaed Damian Cross's phone records as part of the civil discovery. On October 19th, at 3:42 p.m., 5 minutes before Lauren's arrest, Damian Cross placed a 4-minute phone call to a number that Andrea's investigator traced to Officer Blake Harmon's personal cell phone. The hospital's security department was not notified that police were entering the building until after the arrest was in progress. Damian Cross called the arresting officer, directly bypassing all normal protocols just minutes before Lauren was detained during a medical emergency. Tessa sits back in her chair and stares at the evidence spread across 3 monitors. The footage of Caleb Price stealing equipment. The access logs showing administrative edits from Damian Cross's credentials. The phone records showing direct contact between Cross and the arresting officer minutes before the arrest. The security camera showing Cross watching from his window at the exact moment Lauren was handcuffed. It is not circumstantial anymore. It is a pattern of intentional action that can only mean one thing: conspiracy. Andrea compiles everything into a formal brief with exhibits. She has the evidence, but she faces a problem. The criminal case against Lauren is still pending. The district attorney's office has invested resources in prosecuting her and will be reluctant to admit they charged an innocent person. Andrea could file a motion in the criminal case to dismiss charges based on newly discovered evidence, but that would give the prosecution time to develop counter-narratives and potentially bury the story. What she needs is public pressure. She needs people to care before the institutions have time to protect themselves. She needs media coverage that forces accountability instead of allowing quiet settlements with non-disclosure agreements. She needs the story to go viral in a way that makes it impossible for Summit Ridge and the Denver Police Department and the DA's office to pretend this did not happen. She calls Carmen Vega. Carmen is an investigative reporter for Rocky Mountain Independent News, a nonprofit journalism outlet that covers healthcare and criminal justice and public accountability. She has been reporting on Colorado institutions for 15 years and has a reputation for thorough sourcing and aggressive follow-through. She covered Summit Ridge 2 years ago in a piece about suspicious mortality rates that the hospital threatened to sue over before backing down, when their own internal data confirmed her reporting. Andrea sends Carmen an encrypted email with a brief summary. Hospital CEO allegedly framed nurse to silence patient safety advocacy. Have video evidence and phone records. Criminal prosecution ongoing. Need someone who can verify and publish before institutions close ranks. Carmen responds within 2 hours. Can you meet today? They meet at Carmen's office, which is actually a converted warehouse space that houses 4 reporters, 2 editors, and enough filing cabinets to stock a law firm. Carmen listens to the full story while taking notes in shorthand. Then she asks to see the evidence. All of it. Andrea produces the video files, the access logs, the phone records, the timeline analysis. Carmen spends 6 hours reviewing everything with Andrea and Tessa. She asks hard questions. How do you know the video has not been edited? How do you verify the phone records are authentic? What is the chain of custody for this evidence? How do you know Caleb Price was not working with Lauren Hayes? Andrea and Tessa answer each question with documentation. The video files have intact metadata showing they came directly from secure view systems in response to a court order. The phone records are certified by the carrier. The chain of custody is documented through the legal discovery process. And Caleb Price has no connection to Lauren Hayes in any employment records, personal relationships, or social media contacts. They are not conspirators. They are 2 people who worked in the same building and whose only connection is that one was used to frame the other. Carmen makes a decision. She is going to run the story, but she is going to do it right. She contacts the Denver Police Department's Public Information Office for comment. She contacts the District Attorney's Office. She contacts Summit Ridge's PR team. She contacts Damian Cross directly at his office and his listed personal number. She is following standard journalistic protocol, but she is also setting a clock. She gives everyone 24 hours to respond. After that, she publishes with or without their comments. Summit Ridge's legal team panics. They call Carmen and offer an interview with Damian Cross. Carmen accepts with conditions. On camera. No pre-screened questions. Full recording that she controls. They agree because they think they can manage the narrative. They think Damian Cross can talk his way through this the way he talks his way through everything. Confidence and credentials, and the presumption of authority. The interview takes place in Cross's office, the same office from which he watched Lauren's arrest. Carmen brings a camera operator and a backup audio recorder. She starts with softballs. How long have you been CEO? What attracted you to Summit Ridge? Tell me about the hospital's mission. Damian relaxes. He gives smooth, professional answers that sound like they came from a corporate training seminar. Then Carmen shifts. Can you explain why your phone records show a call to Officer Blake Harmon 5 minutes before Lauren Hayes was arrested? Damian's expression flickers. Just for a second. He recovers quickly and says he does not recall every phone call he makes. He talks to law enforcement regularly about security matters. There is nothing unusual about that. Carmen follows up. This was not a call to the police department's main line. This was a call to Officer Harmon's personal cell phone at 3:42 p.m. on October 19th. Can you explain what security matter required you to personally call the arresting officer's cell phone minutes before he arrested one of your employees during a patient emergency? Damian says he would need to review his records. He says he cannot comment on an ongoing criminal investigation. He says these questions are based on incomplete information taken out of context. His answers are vague and defensive. He is still trying to maintain control, but the foundation is cracking. Carmen shows him a still image from the security footage. This is from your hospital's camera system on October 19th at 3:47 p.m. That is you standing at the 4th floor window. What were you watching? Damian looks at the image, and for the first time, he has no smooth answer. He says he does not remember. He says he might have been looking at traffic. He says he often stands at that window during breaks. Each answer sounds worse than the last. Carmen does not push. She just lets the silence sit. The interview ends with Damian saying he has another meeting and standing up before Carmen has finished her questions. This is the moment that will be quoted in every follow-up story. The CEO who could not explain why he watched his employee get arrested. Carmen publishes the story at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. The headline is framed, How a Denver Hospital CEO Allegedly Orchestrated a Nurse's Arrest to Silence Patient Safety Whistleblowing. The story is 1,200 words with embedded video clips, annotated timeline graphics, and links to source documents that readers can verify themselves. Within 90 minutes, it is the most shared story on the outlet's website. Within 3 hours, it is being picked up by local television news. Within 6 hours, it is on the front page of the Denver Post. Within 12 hours, it is national news. The video footage of Caleb Price in the supply room goes viral on social media. So does the image of Damian Cross standing at his window. So does the timeline showing the phone call to Officer Harmon minutes before the arrest. People are not just angry about Lauren's treatment. They are terrified by the implications. If a hospital CEO can weaponize police and evidence systems to destroy an employee who challenged him, then no one who works in healthcare is safe. The story touches a nerve that goes beyond one person. It becomes a referendum on institutional power and the vulnerability of workers who dare to speak up. Summit Ridge's phone system crashes under the volume of calls. The hospital's Google reviews drop from 4.2 stars to 1.8 stars in 48 hours. Patients start requesting transfers. Staff nurses begin calling in sick in numbers that force the hospital to close beds. The board of directors holds an emergency meeting. Damian Cross is placed on administrative leave pending an independent investigation, which is corporate language for "we are going to fire him as soon as our lawyers figure out how to do it without admitting the hospital is liable." The Denver Police Department issues a statement saying they are reviewing the circumstances of the arrest and take all allegations of misconduct seriously. The district attorney's office issues a statement saying they are evaluating new evidence and will make a determination about the charges against Lauren Hayes in due course. Both statements are careful and non-committal. Both are clearly designed by lawyers trying to minimize exposure. Neither admits wrongdoing. Neither apologizes. But the FBI does not need permission to investigate. Federal prosecutors in Colorado open a preliminary inquiry based on the published evidence: wire fraud, evidence tampering, conspiracy to deprive civil rights under color of law. These are federal crimes with mandatory minimum sentences. The agents who show up at Summit Ridge 2 days after the story breaks are not interested in hospital politics. They are interested in prosecuting people who abuse institutional power to frame innocent individuals. The subpoenas go out to SecureView Systems, to MedTrack Pro Vendor HealthGuard Systems, to the Denver Police Department, to telecommunications carriers. The FBI has tools and authority that civil attorneys do not have. They can compel production of records that would take months to obtain through civil discovery. They can offer immunity deals to cooperating witnesses. They can threaten decades in federal prison to people who refuse to cooperate. Caleb Price is arrested 48 hours after the FBI opens its investigation. He is picked up at his apartment at 6 a.m. by agents who give him a choice: cooperate fully and completely, or face federal conspiracy charges that carry 15 years minimum. Caleb has a public defender who is experienced enough to recognize a losing hand. Caleb provides a recorded statement detailing everything: how he was approached by a man named Marcus Reeves, who claimed to be conducting a security audit, how he was given a key and instructions, how he was paid $3,000, how he thought it was legitimate until he saw the news about Lauren's arrest and realized he had been used. The intermediary, Marcus Reeves, is questioned by FBI agents who show him phone records and financial transactions that trace back to accounts he believed were confidential. Marcus has been doing security consulting for 20 years and knows when he has been set up. He provides his communications with the person who hired him. Those communications trace to an LLC registered to a law firm that Summit Ridge uses for outside counsel. That law firm's billing records show payments authorized by Damian Cross. Officer Blake Harmon and Officer Jorge Santos are placed under investigation by Internal Affairs and the FBI's Civil Rights Division. Their phone records show payments from a consulting company that dissolved 2 weeks after Lauren's arrest. The payments were routed through layered business entities, but the money originated from accounts controlled by individuals with financial ties to Summit Ridge's executive compensation structure. The payments were not explicitly for arresting Lauren Hayes. They were for security consulting services that happened to coincide exactly with the frame job timeline. The architecture of the conspiracy unravels because it was built by someone who was arrogant enough to believe that authority and access would protect him from scrutiny. Damian Cross thought he could manipulate systems without consequences because he had always manipulated systems without consequences. He thought institutional power was absolute. He did not account for the fact that every digital system creates records, and every record can be subpoenaed, and every transaction can be traced. The evidence that destroys him is not dramatic. It is banal. Phone logs, calendar entries, system access timestamps, financial transfers. The kind of records that exist in every corporation and government office and hospital. The kind of records that most people never look at. The kind of records that tell the truth in 12-point font and SQL database queries. Lauren learns about the FBI investigation from Andrea, who calls her at 7 in the morning while she is getting ready for her grocery store shift. Andrea tells her the charges are being dropped. The district attorney filed a motion to dismiss based on new evidence demonstrating actual innocence. The motion was granted. Lauren Hayes is no longer facing criminal prosecution. The slate is clean. Lauren sits on the edge of the motel bed, holding her phone, and does not say anything for a long time. Andrea asks if she is okay. Lauren says, "I do not know yet." Andrea tells her the nursing board is processing her license reinstatement. That should be complete within 2 weeks. That Summit Ridge's board has indicated they want to discuss a settlement for the wrongful termination lawsuit. That there will be media requests for interviews. That she should think about what she wants to say and what she wants to happen next. Lauren thanks her and ends the call. She sits in the motel room that smells like cigarette smoke and failure and thinks about Frank Delaney learning to walk with a prosthetic leg. Thinks about 8 months of her life spent working overnight shifts at a grocery store, waiting for a trial that would determine if she went to prison. Thinks about Damian Cross standing at his window, watching her get arrested like it was entertainment. Thinks about the fact that vindication does not undo harm. It just acknowledges that the harm was wrong. She goes to work anyway. Her shift starts in 3 hours, and she has not called in sick once in the 5 months she has worked here. She stocks shelves and organizes inventory and exists in the fluorescent nowhere of a job that requires nothing and offers nothing. Near the end of her shift, her phone starts buzzing continuously. Text messages from numbers she does not recognize. Emails from journalists. A voicemail from someone at a television station asking for an interview. She turns off her phone and finishes her shift. When she walks out at 7 a.m., there are 2 local news vans in the parking lot. Reporters see her and start moving in her direction. She gets in her car and drives away before they can reach her. She does not want to talk. She does not want to be a symbol. She wants to go back to the motel and sleep for 12 hours and wake up in a world where the last 8 months did not happen. But that world does not exist. The only world available is this one, where she was right and it cost her everything, and being proven right does not give back what was taken. The camera never lied. It just took 8 months and a forensic analyst and a civil lawsuit and a journalist who refused to look away before anyone bothered to check what the camera actually showed. And now that people are finally looking, the question is not whether Lauren was innocent. The question is what happens to the people who framed her, and whether institutions can be forced to change in ways that prevent the next Lauren Hayes from being destroyed before anyone thinks to check the footage. Justice in America is not a moment of revelation where truth, triumphs, and wrongs are righted. It is a negotiation between institutions trying to minimize liability and individuals trying to extract acknowledgement from systems designed to never admit fault. Lauren Hayes learns this in the weeks after the charges are dropped, when every entity involved in destroying her life begins the careful choreography of damage control that avoids the word sorry and definitely avoids the phrase, "we were wrong." The district attorney's office drops the charges with a press release that uses the passive voice throughout. New evidence has come to light. The charges are no longer being pursued. The office remains committed to justice and public safety. There is no mention of how their investigation failed to verify the evidence before prosecuting. No acknowledgement that they built a case on fabricated access logs and never questioned why a nurse would steal equipment during shifts when she could easily be caught. No apology to Lauren Hayes for 8 months of criminal prosecution that destroyed her career and finances and mental health. Just the clinical language of a system correcting an error without admitting it made one. Andrea Solis is not surprised by this. She has been practicing employment law long enough to know that institutions never apologize because apologies are admissions of liability, and admissions of liability are expensive. What institutions do is offer money in exchange for silence. They write checks and require non-disclosure agreements and move on as if nothing happened. This is how the system protects itself, not through justice, but through transaction. Summit Ridge Medical Center's board of directors reaches out through their attorneys 3 days after the criminal charges are dropped. They want to settle the wrongful termination lawsuit. They are prepared to offer a substantial financial package in exchange for dismissal of all claims and a mutual non-disparagement agreement. The initial offer is $250,000, which sounds like a lot of money until you calculate 8 months of lost nursing income, destroyed credit, legal fees, and the cost of rebuilding a career from scratch. Andrea tells them the offer is insulting and counteroffers at $3.5 million. The negotiations take 6 weeks. Summit Ridge argues that Lauren's damages are limited because she can return to nursing now that her license is being reinstated. Andrea argues that Lauren's reputation was destroyed. Her career trajectory was derailed, she suffered severe emotional distress, and she will never be able to work in healthcare without people knowing her as the nurse who was arrested, even though she was innocent. The hospital argues that they were victims of Damian Cross's misconduct and should not be held liable for the actions of a rogue executive. Andrea argues that Cross was acting within his authority as CEO, and the hospital's systems enabled his abuse, and the board failed to provide adequate oversight. They eventually settle at $1.8 million. It is less than Andrea wanted, but more than most wrongful termination cases achieve. The settlement includes standard confidentiality provisions that Lauren refuses to sign. She tells Andrea she will walk away from the money if it means she cannot talk about what happened to her. The hospital initially refuses to proceed without confidentiality, but Andrea makes clear that if the settlement falls apart, she will take the case to trial and the publicity will cost Summit Ridge far more than $1.8 million in lost revenue and reputation damage. The hospital blinks first. They remove the confidentiality clause. Lauren can tell her story. They cannot stop her. But Lauren does not want just money. She wants change. And this is where the negotiation becomes unusual, because most plaintiffs in wrongful termination cases are focused on financial compensation and moving on with their lives. Lauren has spent 8 months in a motel room working overnight shifts, thinking about what justice actually means. Money helps. Money keeps her from being homeless. But money does not prevent the next Lauren Hayes from being arrested during a code blue because she challenged a CEO's budget cuts. She tells Andrea she wants specific reforms written into the settlement agreement as conditions of acceptance. Andrea explains that you cannot usually force policy changes through a civil settlement. Lauren says then, we go to trial and let a jury decide what Summit Ridge owes. Andrea thinks about this and realizes that Lauren is serious and that a jury might actually award more than $1.8 million and might also issue findings that would force changes anyway. She goes back to the hospital's attorneys with Lauren's demands. First demand. Summit Ridge must implement an independent audit system for all administrative access to clinical and security databases. No executive, including the CEO, can modify access logs, inventory records, personnel files, or patient data without those modifications being logged in a separate system maintained by an outside auditing firm. Every administrative change must be reviewed quarterly by an independent auditor who reports directly to the board, not to hospital management. Any unexplained modifications trigger automatic investigation. The hospital pushes back. This is expensive and implies they cannot trust their own executives. Andrea responds that they already proved they cannot trust their own executives, and the cost of the audit system is less than the cost of the next lawsuit when another executive abuses access privileges. The hospital agrees. Second demand. Summit Ridge must adopt a policy prohibiting law enforcement from detaining healthcare workers who are actively engaged in patient care unless there is an immediate threat of violence to patients or staff. Arrests for nonviolent offenses must be coordinated with hospital security and scheduled to avoid disruption of clinical duties. Any officer who detains a healthcare worker during a medical emergency without supervisor approval faces automatic complaint to their department. The hospital argues they cannot control what police do. Andrea argues they can refuse to cooperate with police who violate the policy, and they can make compliance a condition of their institutional relationship with local law enforcement. The hospital agrees with modifications that give them flexibility in emergencies. Third, demand. Summit Ridge must establish a protected whistleblower hotline managed by an outside law firm that has no other business relationship with the hospital. Employees who report safety concerns through the hotline cannot be retaliated against, and all retaliation complaints must be investigated by independent counsel within 30 days. Findings must be reported to the board. Employees who are found to have been retaliated against receive automatic financial compensation and reinstatement. The hospital argues this creates moral hazard where employees can make false claims. Andrea argues that Lauren made true claims and was arrested for it, so maybe the hospital should be more worried about silencing legitimate concerns than false ones. The hospital agrees. Fourth, demand. Summit Ridge must restore nursing staff to ratios recommended by the American Association of Critical Care Nurses and must publicly report staffing data quarterly on their website. The board must review patient safety metrics in relation to staffing levels at every meeting, and those reviews must be documented in public meeting minutes. The hospital argues this is operational interference and outside the scope of an employment settlement. Andrea argues that inadequate staffing is what motivated Lauren to speak up in the first place, and fixing it is the only way to prevent future retaliation. If Summit Ridge refuses, they can explain to a jury why they think patient safety is not relevant to a case about retaliating against a nurse who advocated for patient safety. The hospital agrees with language that gives them some flexibility in implementation timeline. Fifth, demand. Summit Ridge must create an office of patient advocacy with real authority, including the ability to investigate complaints, access patient records with appropriate privacy protections, and report findings directly to the board without review or approval by hospital administration. The patient advocate must be someone with clinical background and cannot be terminated except for cause with board approval. The hospital agrees to this one quickly because it sounds good publicly, and they assume they can control who gets hired and what they actually do. Andrea makes sure the settlement specifies that the first patient advocate must be approved by Lauren and that the position cannot be eliminated for at least 5 years. This ensures the role has actual independence during its startup period. These conditions are written into the settlement agreement as binding obligations with financial penalties for non-compliance. If Summit Ridge violates any provision, they pay Lauren an additional $250,000 per violation, plus her attorney's fees to enforce the agreement. The settlement transforms from a simple financial payout into a consent decree that forces institutional change. It is not perfect. There are loopholes and ways the hospital might minimize compliance, but it is more than most plaintiffs ever achieve, and it creates a framework that other hospitals might adopt to avoid similar liability. Lauren signs the settlement on a Tuesday afternoon in Andrea's conference room. The check is wired to an escrow account. After attorney's fees and costs, Lauren will receive approximately $1.3 million. It is more money than she has ever had, and less than the value of 8 months of her life. She feels nothing when she signs. Not relief, not satisfaction. Just the quiet acknowledgement that this chapter is ending and the next one is uncertain. While the civil settlement grinds toward conclusion, the federal criminal investigation accelerates with the methodical efficiency of prosecutors who have evidence and leverage, and defendants who are watching their options narrow. Damian Cross is arrested at his home on a Monday morning at 5:47 a.m., which is early enough that neighbors are not yet awake, but late enough that morning joggers and dog walkers are starting to emerge, and can witness a man in an expensive bathrobe being placed in the back of an unmarked federal vehicle. The FBI does not do perp walks for white-collar criminals in affluent neighborhoods, but they do execute warrants with enough visibility that word spreads. By noon, the arrest is confirmed through federal court records showing that Damian Cross has been charged with conspiracy to tamper with evidence deprivation of civil rights under color of law wire fraud and obstruction of justice. The indictment is 37 pages long and reads like a thriller novel, except every word is supported by phone records, digital forensics witness statements, and video evidence that juries can watch for themselves. Cross hires a defense team from a white-collar firm in Denver that charges $750 per hour and immediately begins filing motions. Motion to suppress the video evidence claiming it was obtained through overly broad civil subpoenas. Motion to dismiss the civil rights charges, claiming Cross had no law enforcement authority and therefore could not have acted under color of law. Motion to sever the counts, claiming that trying multiple charges together would prejudice the jury. Every motion is denied. The evidence is overwhelming, and the judge is not sympathetic to arguments that amount to, "I had sophisticated ways of committing crimes, so you should not be allowed to use sophisticated methods to catch me." The pre-trial phase lasts 4 months. Cross's attorneys try to negotiate a plea deal that avoids prison time. The prosecution offers a deal that includes 4 years in federal prison. Cross refuses. He still believes he can win at trial, or at least hang a jury with one sympathetic member who thinks CEOs are being unfairly targeted. His attorneys advise him that going to trial is a terrible idea. He fires those attorneys and hires new ones who tell him what he wants to hear. 2 weeks before trial, Cross's new attorneys review the evidence again and realize the old attorneys were right. The video of Caleb Price stealing equipment is definitive. The phone records showing Cross calling Officer Harmon 5 minutes before the arrest are definitive. The system logs showing Cross modified access records using his administrative credentials are definitive. The security footage showing him watching Lauren's arrest from his window is definitive. There is no defense theory that explains all of this away. There is only the choice between a plea deal and a trial that ends with decades in prison. Cross pleads guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to tamper with evidence and 1 count of deprivation of civil rights under color of law. The other charges are dismissed as part of the agreement. He allocates before the judge, which means he has to state in his own words what he did and why it was illegal. He says he modified hospital records to create false evidence against Lauren Hayes. He says he coordinated her arrest to prevent her from providing patient care. He says he did this because she had publicly challenged his authority, and he wanted to remove her from the organization. The allocution is brief and legalistic, but it is a confession. Damian Cross admits under oath that he framed Lauren Hayes. Sentencing happens 6 weeks later. The federal sentencing guidelines recommend 46 to 57 months. Cross's attorneys argue for downward departure based on his lack of criminal history and his contributions to the community. The prosecution argues for an upward departure based on abuse of authority and the severity of harm to Lauren Hayes and Frank Delaney. The judge splits the difference and sentences Cross to 48 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. Cross is also ordered to pay restitution to Lauren Hayes in the amount of $150,000 for her criminal defense costs and other expenses directly related to the frame job. 48 months is 4 years. Damian Cross, who made $420,000 per year as a hospital CEO and controlled budgets in the tens of millions and believed himself untouchable, will spend 4 years in a federal correctional institution. He will likely serve approximately 34 months with good behavior and time credits. He will be 59 years old when he is released. His medical license was never active because he had an MBA, not an MD. But his ability to work in healthcare administration is functionally over. No hospital will hire an executive with a federal conviction for evidence tampering and civil rights violations. Officer Blake Harmon and Officer Jorge Santos face their own consequences, though theirs are calibrated differently. because the evidence shows they were tools rather than architects. Internal Affairs completes its investigation and determines they violated department policy by coordinating with a civilian complainant without notifying their chain of command and by executing an arrest in a manner that unnecessarily disrupted patient care. Both officers are terminated from the Denver Police Department. The FBI charges them with deprivation of civil rights under color of law for arresting Lauren Hayes as part of a conspiracy to obstruct her from providing medical care. Both officers plead guilty. Harmon receives 18 months in federal prison. Santos receives 12 months. The disparity reflects that Harmon made the initial contact with Cross's intermediary and recruited Santos into the scheme. Both officers lose their law enforcement credentials permanently. They cannot work as police officers or security guards or in any position that requires carrying a weapon or making arrests. They are 42 and 38 years old, respectively, with law enforcement careers that are over. Caleb Price, who cooperated from the beginning and provided testimony against all the other defendants, receives 3 years probation and 200 hours of community service. He loses his job at Summit Ridge, but avoids prison. He is 27 years old and will spend the rest of his life knowing he helped destroy someone's career for $3,000. During his proffer sessions with prosecutors, he cried and said he thought it was a legitimate security test. And by the time he realized it was not, he did not know how to get out of it without admitting he had broken the law. The prosecutors believed him. So did the judge. Caleb was a patsy, a useful idiot, a young man who made a terrible choice and got used by people with more power and fewer scruples. The consequences are distributed. The institutions involved issue statements and implement reforms and move forward. The Denver Police Department adopts new protocols for arrests at medical facilities. The District Attorney's Office creates a new review process for cases that rely heavily on evidence from complainant institutions. Summit Ridge Medical Center complies with the settlement terms and hires consultants to rehabilitate their public image. The machinery of justice has processed the crime and assigned penalties, and everyone can return to normal operations, having learned valuable lessons about accountability and oversight and the importance of following proper procedures. Except Lauren Hayes cannot return to normal operations because her normal was destroyed, and what replaces it is something new that she has to build from wreckage. Her nursing license is reinstated after the Board of Nursing completes its review and determines the criminal charges were unfounded. She receives a formal letter stating that she is in good standing and authorized to practice as a registered nurse in Colorado. She could go back to ICU nursing. Several hospitals reach out with job offers. Some are genuine attempts to hire a competent nurse. Some are publicity stunts to show they are not like Summit Ridge. She declines all of them. She cannot walk into an ICU without hearing the code blue alarm. Cannot see a crash cart without feeling handcuffs. Cannot look at a patient monitor without thinking about Frank Delaney's oxygen saturation dropping while she was being arrested 15 feet away from his room. The work she loved has been contaminated by trauma. She is honest enough with herself to acknowledge that she cannot do it anymore. Not right now. Maybe not ever. What she can do is use what happened to her to change systems so it happens to fewer other people. She takes a position as a patient safety consultant, working with a firm that helps hospitals review their policies and implement best practices. The work is less direct than bedside nursing, but it allows her to do what she tried to do at Summit Ridge: identify risks, advocate for changes, push institutions to prioritize safety over cost. The difference is that now she has leverage. Hospitals hire her because they are afraid of becoming the next Summit Ridge. They are afraid of viral news stories and federal investigations and settlements with binding reform requirements. Fear is more motivating than conscience, and Lauren is fine with that. She is good at the consulting work in ways that make hospital administrators uncomfortable. She does not soften her language or accept institutional excuses. When a hospital executive tells her that staffing ratios are constrained by budget realities, she responds with patient outcome data and litigation risk analysis that shows understaffing costs more than adequate staffing when you account for settlements and increased length of stay due to complications. When administrators claim that certain policies cannot change because of operational constraints, she asks them to explain those constraints to the families of patients who died from preventable errors. She is blunt and specific and unwilling to tolerate the corporate doublespeak that allows institutions to pretend they are doing their best while systematically choosing profit over safety. Some hospitals love her because she identifies problems they knew existed but could not get leadership to address. Some hospitals hate her because she makes them confront uncomfortable truths about their priorities. She does not care which category a hospital falls into as long as they implement the changes she recommends. Her fee structure includes performance bonuses tied to measurable improvements in safety metrics. She makes money when hospitals get better. This aligns her incentives with patient outcomes rather than institutional convenience. She speaks at nursing conferences about whistleblower protection and the institutional dynamics that silence healthcare workers. She testifies before the Colorado legislature about hospital staffing regulations and the need for protections against retaliation. She does not enjoy public speaking, but she does it anyway, because her story is useful and useful things should be used. When she tells audiences that she was arrested during a code blue for challenging a CEO's budget cuts, people lean forward. When she explains how the frame job worked, people take notes. When she shows the security footage of Damian Cross watching her arrest from his office window, rooms go quiet. Her story is a weapon against institutional complacency, and she wields it deliberately. But there is one conversation she has been avoiding. One person she has not spoken to in almost a year. One piece of unfinished business that sits like a stone in her chest every time she thinks about it. Frank Delaney is 73 years old now. He completed his rehabilitation and learned to walk with a prosthetic leg. He lives in the same house where he lived with his wife Patricia before she died. His daughter Megan checks on him daily, and he has visiting nurses who help with wound care and medication management. He is alive and functional, and learning to navigate a world where he will never walk without thinking about the mechanical device attached to his body below the knee. Megan has been asking Lauren to visit for months. Lauren has been finding reasons not to. She is busy with consulting work. She is still processing her own trauma. She needs more time. These are all true, but they are also avoidance. The truth is that Lauren cannot face Frank because facing Frank means confronting the cost of 4 minutes. 4 minutes that exist because she tried to do the right thing and powerful people decided to destroy her for it. 4 minutes that would not have happened if she had stayed quiet like Dr. Priya Shah and Kim Alvarez and all the other people who saw problems and chose silence over risk. Megan finally stops asking and just sends an address and a time. Saturday at 2 p.m. Frank wants to see you. Please come. Lauren stares at the text message for 3 days. Then she drives to the address on Saturday and sits in her car outside Frank's house for 15 minutes before walking to the door. Megan answers and hugs her without saying anything. The house smells like coffee and old wood and the specific kind of quiet that comes from people living alone. Frank is in the living room sitting in a recliner with his prosthetic leg extended. He looks older than Lauren remembers, thinner, tired in ways that have nothing to do with sleep. But his eyes are clear, and when he sees her, he smiles. She sits on the couch across from him. Megan brings coffee and then excuses herself to give them privacy. Lauren does not know how to start, so she just says, "I am so sorry. I tried to reach you. They stopped me. If I had been 30 seconds faster, if they had waited 30 seconds, I could have prevented this. I am so sorry." Frank lets her finish. Then he says, "You did not do this to me. You tried to save me. They stopped you." That is not your fault. Lauren shakes her head. If I had not challenged the budget cuts, if I had just kept my mouth shut like everyone else told me to, you would still have both legs. Frank leans forward slightly. And how many other patients would be dead or hurt because nobody spoke up? You think you are the only nurse who tried to save someone that day. You think those budget cuts only affected me. They affected everyone. You tried to stop it. You did the right thing. The right thing cost you, and it cost me, and that is wrong. But you still did it. They sit in silence for a while. The kind of silence that is not awkward, but necessary. Lauren looks at the prosthetic leg and thinks about all the moments Frank will never have again. Walking his grandchildren to school, dancing at weddings, hiking trails he used to love, all gone because of 4 minutes that should not have existed. Frank follows her gaze and says it is not as bad as you think. I can walk, I can drive, I can live my life. It is different, but it is still life. I am grateful for that. I am grateful you tried. Lauren asks how he can be grateful when she failed. Frank says you did not fail. You ran toward me when everyone else was running away from trouble. That is not failure. That is what nurses do. You did what you were supposed to do. They stopped you from doing it. They are the ones who failed. Megan comes back with more coffee. The three of them sit together talking about physical therapy and prosthetic technology and the strange reality of being grateful to be alive while grieving what was lost. It is not a Hollywood ending. There is no moment of catharsis where everyone cries and hugs and the music swells. There is just 3 people who survived a system designed to break them, sitting in a living room with afternoon light coming through windows, acknowledging that survival is not the same as justice, but it is something. Lauren leaves 2 hours later. She sits in her car and thinks about Frank saying, "You did the right thing." She thinks about Damian Cross sitting in a federal prison. She thinks about the reforms at Summit Ridge and the hospitals that hire her to prevent them from becoming the next scandal. She thinks about every nurse who will benefit from whistleblower protections and every patient who will benefit from better staffing ratios. She thinks about whether any of it was worth 4 minutes and 1 leg and 8 months of her life spent working overnight shifts at a grocery store while facing prison for crimes she did not commit. She does not have an answer. Maybe there is no answer. Maybe the only thing you can do is choose whether to speak up or stay silent and then live with the consequences of that choice, knowing that both options have costs, and neither is fair, and the system that forces the choice is the real problem. She drives home. The Denver skyline is visible in the distance. Summit Ridge Medical Center is somewhere out there, still operating, still treating patients, still making calculations about profit and risk. The reforms she fought for are being implemented slowly with the reluctant compliance of an institution that resents being forced to change. Other hospitals are watching to see if Summit Ridge's changes actually improve outcomes or just create more bureaucracy. Some will adopt similar policies proactively. Most will wait until they face their own scandal. The system does not change because people suddenly develop consciences. The system changes because lawsuits are expensive, and bad publicity is expensive, and federal investigations are expensive. The system changes because institutions learn that silence and complicity cost more than transparency and accountability. This is not inspirational. This is just how power works. Power concedes nothing without pressure and consequences and the credible threat of more pressure and more consequences. Lauren gets home and opens her laptop. She has 3 consulting projects underway and 2 speaking engagements scheduled and a legislative hearing next month where she will testify about proposed regulations for hospital staffing ratios. Her calendar is full. Her bank account has money in it for the first time in her adult life. She is not happy, but she is functional, and functional is progress. Her phone buzzes with a text from Tessa. "You good?" Lauren responds, "I am okay." Tessa sends back, "You are a goddamn force of nature." Lauren sends back, "I am a nurse who got arrested." Tessa sends back, "You are a nurse who changed an entire hospital's policies and put a CEO in federal prison." Lauren does not respond because she does not know what to say to that. She is not sure she changed anything fundamental. She is not sure any individual can change systems that are designed to resist change. All she knows is that she tried, and it cost her, and some things got better, and some things did not, and she is still here, which means she can keep trying. She thinks about what she would tell a younger version of herself before the board meeting, before the arrest, before everything. She would not tell herself to stay quiet. Staying quiet means being complicit. She would not tell herself that speaking up will work out fine. Speaking up nearly destroyed her. What she would say is speak up anyway. Document everything. Find allies. Understand that institutions will protect themselves and you need to protect yourself too. And know that even if you do everything right, you might still lose everything and you have to decide if the fight is worth the cost. For Lauren, the fight was worth it. Not because she won, not because she got vindication or money or revenge, but because Frank Delaney is alive and Summit Ridge has policies that might prevent the next nurse from being arrested during a Code Blue. And every hospital that hires her as a consultant is a little bit safer because she refuses to let them pretend problems do not exist. This is what the system owes. Not apologies, not acknowledgement, not even justice in any meaningful sense. What the system owes is change. Concrete, measurable, enforceable change that makes it harder for the next Damian Cross to weaponize power against the next Lauren Hayes. And if the system will not provide that change voluntarily, then people like Lauren have to force it through lawsuits and media coverage and testimony, and the relentless insistence that safety matters more than quarterly earnings. Power loves quiet hallways and deleted footage and non-disclosure agreements that buy silence. Power loves systems that protect themselves and punish people who question them. Power counts on exhaustion and fear and the rational calculation that fighting back costs more than it is worth. And sometimes, just sometimes, power is wrong. The camera never lied. It just needed someone willing to look. And once people started looking, once the truth came into focus through timestamps and metadata and the boring infrastructure of institutional record-keeping, the elegant conspiracy fell apart. Because crimes documented in 12-point font are still crimes, and evidence that exists in server backups does not care about authority or credentials or the belief that power means impunity. Lauren closes her laptop and looks out the window. The sun is setting over Denver. Tomorrow, she has a hospital site visit in Colorado Springs. Next week, she has a conference presentation in Chicago. Next month, she has legislative testimony that might result in actual regulations with enforcement mechanisms. The work continues. The fight continues. Because systems do not fix themselves, and power does not limit itself, and the only thing that changes institutions is people who refuse to be silent, even when silence would be easier and safer and more rational. She was 30 seconds from saving a life. A CEO made sure she would not. And the camera proved that truth matters even when institutions wish it did not. This is not the end of the story. This is just the end of the part where Lauren was the victim. The next part, the part that is still being written, is about what happens when victims become advocates and use their scars as credentials and refuse to let anyone forget that every policy failure has a human cost. Frank Delaney has one leg. Lauren Hayes has $1.8 million and a consulting practice and a voice that institutions have learned to fear. Damian Cross has 4 years in federal prison. The system continues operating because systems always continue operating. But the system is slightly different now. Slightly more accountable. Slightly more transparent. slightly more afraid of what happens when cameras and courage intersect. It is not enough. It will never be enough. But it is more than there was before. And that is how change happens. Not through inspiration or revelation, through incremental pressure applied by people who refuse to stop pushing even after the system tries to break them. Lauren Hayes is still pushing. And every hospital that hires her, every policy that gets reformed, every nurse who speaks up because she proved it is possible to survive retaliation and win, is a testament to a simple truth that power prefers to ignore. The camera never lies. And neither should the people who care for patients when those patients are most vulnerable and when institutions care more about budgets than lives. That is what nurses do. That is what Lauren Hayes did. That is what cost her 8 months of hell and what gave her a mission that will define the rest of her career. She tried to save a life. They stopped her, and then she made sure they would never stop anyone like her again. At least not without consequences. At least not without someone checking the cameras. At least not without the possibility that silence can be broken and power can be challenged. And sometimes the people who do the right thing survive long enough to change the systems that tried to destroy them for it.